Chapter 26. Morgan knew what the dwarves were thinking. Just like Thorin Oakenshield said before. Now that the trolls are going to escape, there is really no need for the dwarves to risk their death. Morgan would certainly have agreed to this if he hadn't known about the treasure hidden in the troll's cave. But now the key ogre hiding cave not only has a lot of gold and silver treasures, but also several high elf swords. It's just that Morgan couldn't explain it to the group. The cross sword that Morgan is using now is the most common iron sword brought by the town guard, brought out by the original owner from the small town of Faroe. He has wanted to change to a long sword for a long time. More than a month ago in Hobbiton, Gandalf wanted to change the sword when he took him to sell the giant bear, but there was not enough money. The high elf swords now hidden in the troll's cave were waiting for him. How could Morgan bear this? Just like those who like to play computers want to own an alien, those who like motorcycles want to own a Kawasaki, and those who like four-wheeled dream want to own a Lambo Ferrari. Morgan, who likes to play with swords now, is also irresistible to the temptation of the high elves' long swords. Do you still have to do it yourself in the end? Seeing that the last and largest ogre rushed out of the encirclement of the dwarves, it was about to run deep into the forest. This thought popped up in Morgan's mind again. 2 of the 3 trolls were shot and killed by himself, and now there is only the last one left. If you really want to do it alone, although it will be a little troublesome to kill the other party, it will definitely not be too difficult. But the point is that killing each other is simple. It's also easy to monopolize the treasure and sword in the troll's cave. The rare thing is how he took out the high elf sword and explained it to everyone in the expedition team. I can't say that this is what I picked up on the road. Morgan wants to gain the trust of everyone, which will benefit his future plans. He is doing a good job now, but if he takes out the elf sword rashly and cannot explain why, it is very likely that this trust will be destroyed, and the loss outweighs the gain. Gan. Morgan was upset, and suddenly found that the rain around him was much lighter. Looking up at the sky, I found that the sky was much brighter. The torrential rain in early autumn lasted for nearly an hour, and it must not be far from the end. And with the trolls making such a fuss. Once the rain stopped, Thorin Oakenshield would definitely let the team continue on the road. It doesn't matter, don't care if it can be used or not. First kill the ogre, and take the treasure in the other's cave and the sword of the high elf as your own. It's a big deal to bury it first, make a mark, and come to pick it up later when I have time. Just as Morgan secretly made up his mind. When the last ogre was about to flee to the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a burst of extremely dazzling white light burst out in front of the ogre. The troll looked terrified, covered his eyes and yelled, and quickly backed away. It's just that he was too big, and he retreated too quickly for a while, and fell to the ground without taking 2 steps. Bang! The ground shook. At this time, everyone in the expedition team hadn't looked back from the ogre. Seeing such a change, Morgan looked overjoyed. Holding a longbow, he immediately chased after him. At this moment, the man who had caused such a fright to the ogre stepped forward. Wearing a grey robe, holding a wooden staff, and wearing a grey peaked hat. It was the wizard Gandalf who had left before. Seeing that the dwarves were still indifferent, Gandalf immediately shouted, "This is a rock troll. This monster has a strong desire for revenge. What are you still doing there? Are you waiting for this monster to chat with you at night?" After Gandalf's words fell, Thorin Oakenshield immediately reacted. "Quick, go up and entangle it and create opportunities for Morgan." Thorin Oakenshield's complexion changed, and he roared loudly. The dwarves finally came to their senses, and immediately rushed up to the fallen ogre. The ogre, who was originally extremely sensitive to light, was just terrified. But when he found that he was fine, the troll quickly reacted. It's just that the huge, strong, and nearly 5-meter-tall troll fell to the ground and couldn't get up so easily. Before the troll got up, Morgan, who was the first to start, rushed to the troll. Looking at the huge monster struggling to get up in front of his eyes. Morgan immediately jumped onto a nearby big tree, quickly climbed to the center of the trunk, hooked his feet around the trunk, leaned out sideways, held a bow in one hand, and drew an arrow from the quiver on his back with the other. It is different from the concentration of an arrow that has been dealing with these trolls before. Morgan drew 3 arrows this time. The 3 arrows were quickly put on the bowstring, and Morgan's gaze at the huge ogre immediately became focused and extremely profound. Morgan hasn't made a move yet. At this moment, the troll struggled to his feet. A group of dwarves finally arrived. Thorin Oakenshield looked at the figure hanging on the tree trunk not far away, aiming at the ogre with a bow and arrow, and immediately roared. Come on, come on! Don't let it stand up! Thorin Oakenshield roared and rushed forward first, and stabbed the ogre's thick lower limbs with his sword. The dwarves who followed Thorin Oakenshield also noticed Morgan's figure at this time. They swarmed forward, rushed to the side of the ogre, and raised all kinds of weapons, stabbing and smashing. Too many ants can kill a person. What's more, a group of dwarves are far stronger than ants. A large number of attacks immediately injured the leg of the giant troll, and the huge body that was about to stand up was immediately powerless with the injury of a key leg. His feet were soft, and with a bang, the entire giant body of the ogre fell to the ground again. Damn! You bloody dwarf radishes! The troll Monbo was furious, and immediately waved his big hand and slapped the surrounding dwarves violently. These annoying dwarves, when he gets up, he must eat these dwarves alive. Monber has noticed that the human archer who shot his younger brother Rob and Kobo not far away is aiming at him. So he didn't get up, but put a hand in front of his eyes, and then started to turn around on the spot. Meng Bai believes that as long as he doesn't get shot in the eye, the human archer can't do anything to him. Morgan aimed at the huge ogre calmly, and did not shoot rashly, nor did he slacken the slightest bit because of the ogre's behavior of covering his face. He was waiting for the best opportunity, a one-shot kill like before. He believes that this group of partners will create such opportunities for him. Just when the ogre was about to turn around, Gandalf finally made another move. The figure quickly approached the ogre, and then raised the staff in his hand high. Wow! The dazzling white light once again bloomed in front of the ogre. Ow! The troll screamed in pain, leaned back in a hurry, and tried to hide sideways with its huge, bald head. It's now! The moment the troll panicked and couldn't cover his eyes. Morgan seized the opportunity and plucked the bowstring with his fingers on the longbow. Chapter 27. The first title. Whoosh whoosh. The 3 arrows roared and shot away with the sound of piercing through the air. So close. Almost just for a split second. 3 arrows reached the ogre. Ow! The shrill screams from the dull-voiced troll immediately shook the entire forest. Morgan got shot. Seeing the ogre covering its face and screaming, the dwarves were overjoyed, and immediately retreated behind without any orders. Just as the dwarves feared. The troll, who was in severe pain, immediately went crazy, and a pair of big hands immediately slapped and danced around. The dwarves were struggling to back off. It's just that Bombur, who was the fattest among the dwarves, tripped over his feet when he retreated, and was slapped by the crazy ogre when he got up again to escape. As if hit by a large truck traveling at high speed, Pangbo's body immediately flew upside down tens of meters, hit the trunk of a big tree, and then fell. Bomber! Bomber! The dwarves immediately exclaimed, and the dwarves who had just pulled away from the troll were about to rush towards Bomber. At this moment, the troll, who was in a frenzy, accidentally touched the thick tree trunk weapon that had been dropped before. Thus, an even more astonishing madness began. With a height of 5 meters, the extremely burly ogre carried a thick tree trunk and slammed it around wildly. All of a sudden, the vegetation flew wildly, the dust danced wildly, the mud splashed everywhere, and the ground shook. Even the giant tree, as thick as an adult's body, was easily knocked down and broken by the berserk ogre. Morgan and Gandalf on the periphery quickly retreated backwards. A group of dwarves who were closer to the ogre fled desperately. If this was hit by a stick, it wouldn't be the consequence of Pangbur being shot flying just now. And it must be the fate of being smashed to pieces, smashed into dwarf brand meat sauce. Ho ho! When a group of dwarves fled in embarrassment to a safe enough distance, panting and looking at the crazy ogre ahead. Only then did he see where Morgan had just shot the troll. At this time, the ogre, who was in a frenzy, had a total of 3 arrows stuck in his face. An arrow landed just above the ogre's eye socket. The other 2 arrows shot into the bloody eye socket of the troll respectively. It's just that one arrow only shot halfway in, leaving half of the arrow and the bloody tail feathers outside. The body of the remaining arrow was completely submerged in the eye socket, and only the tail feathers completely stained red by black blood were faintly visible. Call! At this moment, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. With the deaths of the first 2 trolls in front, no matter how big the troll in front of him is, he will definitely die if he is shot like this. The current madness is just a struggle before death. While everyone was glad to relax, they couldn't help looking at Morgan in another direction. This guy Morgan's archery skills are too strong, too powerful. All 3 giant trolls were shot in the only fatal eye area, and all died at Morgan's hands. Such a terrifying record is exactly like the legendary protagonist circulated among bards. Once Morgan's record of killing 3 giant trolls in a row today can be spread in Middle-earth. Presumably he can become the most popular one in all the taverns in Middle-earth. It's just that Morgan still has to wait a long time to enjoy that kind of treatment. In the world of cold weapons, the speed at which stories spread is not fast. What's more, all the participants who knew about this incident were still on an adventure like fleeing. But Morgan doesn't have to worry, his record of killing 3 giant trolls in succession today will definitely spread. Because the vast majority of the audience present are dwarves. The dwarves like to drink and brag the most, so no one needs to ask when the time comes, the dwarves will come up with Morgan's deeds and brag after a few more drinks. And they're sure to say, "Look, I was Morgan's partner at the time, and I owe it to him to kill those 3 trolls. Kill 3 giant trolls in a row." It is no exaggeration to say that Morgan is a troll terminator and a troll butcher. Just like Thorin back then, he got the title of Oak Shield because he picked up a piece of oak as a shield and turned the tide in the fierce battle with the orcs. At this time, whoever calls Morgan a troll terminator, troll butcher or troll natural enemy or something like that. In the eyes of the members of the expedition, this made perfect sense. Because Morgan deserves it, he has such a qualification. Naturally, Morgan didn't know what was going on in the hearts of the expedition team members. Not to mention that in the hearts of the members of the expedition team, he already had his first title. Speaking of which, throughout Middle-earth, there are very few characters who can break through the title, and all of them are strong. Talk about something closer to Morgan. Thorin Oakenshield. And who is Thorin Oakenshield? Among the 7 Middle-earth dwarf clans, the most powerful, most precious, and most orthodox family leader of the Turin dwarf clan. He once experienced the war of destroying the country after the dragon Smaug attacked the kingdom under the mountain. Participated in several battles between the dwarves and the half-orcs, especially in the most important battle of Asan-yu-Bisa, when his grandfather Saul, the king of the mountain, died in battle. Thorin Oakenshield turned the tide and defeated the big leader of the half-orcs, turning the originally defeated battle situation around in one fell swoop. Thus won the recognition and love of the entire Turin dwarves. Thorin Oakenshield's strength and achievements have been recognized by the entire Middle-earth world. A well-deserved leader of the dwarves. Among all the dwarves in Middle-earth, Thorin Oakenshield seems to be the only dwarf that Morgan knows can claim titles by himself instead of relying on status inheritance. And another, the sworn enemy of the dwarves. The leader of the half-orcs, Azog, the half-orc of Gundaba known as the Destroyer and the Defiler. Azog's strength, status, and titles are all titles obtained through a series of horrific wars and killings, and they are absolutely well-deserved. In fact, Azog's power and terror can be described with only one title, the Great Leader of the Orcs. There are also some other titles like Dark Lord Sauron, Queen of the Elf. These are all real big shots, big bosses. Of course, the title also has a size. Such as the size of the record and the size of the achievements, it must be different. In short, Morgan was able to win his first title in more than 2 months after coming to Middle-earth. It's already a remarkable achievement. Although at this time Morgan knew nothing about it. Back to the topic. Under the distant onlookers of the members of the expedition team, the troll who fell into madness only lasted a little longer than the first 2 trolls after the arrow in the eye socket. Boom! With the huge body of the ogre, it crashed to the ground. These 3 troll brothers should have died in the sun in the plot memory. At this time, they all died in the hands of Morgan alone. Chapter 28, Go First. Call. Finally dead. Looking at the gigantic troll that rumbled to the ground in the distance, Morgan let out a long breath. Speaking of which, some people in the expedition team may think that it is easy for Morgan to kill these trolls, just move his fingers. And it is true. In addition to running hard, keep your eyes bright, and aim with your bow until your hands are sore. Physically, archers are indeed a bit lighter than melee ones. However, the real exhaustion of an archer is actually mental. Because the quiver carried by the archer and the arrows in the quiver are limited. This requires the archer to be highly concentrated every time he draws the bow, in order to kill more enemies. After a battle, the mental exhaustion of the archers can be imagined. Warriors consume physical strength, and archers consume spirits. In fact, neither of them is easier than the other. Because fighting is a very dangerous behavior. This is the illusion that ordinary laymen see the ease of archers. Like Morgan, it seemed that it was quite easy to shoot and kill giant trolls that the entire expedition team couldn't deal with. In fact, the difficulty and exhaustion of the spirit, only Morgan himself knows best. Of course, Keely, the dwarf who is also an archer, might know something. Hey, Gandalf, where have you been? I thought you were missing. Looking away from the huge corpse of the troll, Morgan turned his head to look at Gandalf not far away and smiled, and strode over. It's just to relax, you know, the stubbornness of dwarves is really, really unbearable sometimes. Hearing Morgan's question about this, Gandalf shrugged and said helplessly. Of course Morgan knew what Gandalf was referring to. In fact, it just doesn't mention Gandalf's previous dispute with Thorin Oakenshield. During the journey of more than a month, Thorin Oakenshield and the dwarves have demonstrated the stubbornness of the dwarves many times. Relax, the whole world knows how stubborn a dwarf is. Morgan stepped forward and comforted him with a smile. Gandalf shook his head and said nothing, turned his head to look at the huge corpse of the ogre in the distance and frowned and asked, "How did you meet these monsters?" "I don't know exactly. When I appeared, Keely and Philly were dealing with one of the monsters. But probably the monster stole our horse." Morgan shook his head and said while looking at the corpse in the distance. "Do you know what kind of monster this is?" Morgan turned to look at Gandalf, asking the question knowingly. "The only other evil monster of this size is the troll, and the rock troll among the trolls." After Gandalf finished speaking, Morgan grasped the details and quickly asked again, "You mean, there are other types of trolls?" Gandalf said nothing, but looked up at the sky. At this time, the rain has completely stopped, and the sky has become much brighter. Knowing that it was impossible to continue to rain, Gandalf took out the tobacco rod casually, filled it with shredded tobacco skillfully, and lit the fire. "Come on." Gandalf took a puff beautifully and exhaled the smoke before speaking slowly. "Of course, there's more than one kind of troll. As far as I know, there are several types of trolls, such as mountain trolls, rock trolls, and cave trolls. The kind of troll we are looking at now is a rock troll that can only appear at dusk and night, and will turn into stone when it sees sunlight." Just as Gandalf finished speaking, a voice suddenly broke in. "Will you turn to stone when you see the sun? That means it should only appear at night, so why did those three appear here?" Thorin Oakenshield came over with a group of dwarves. Hearing what Gandalf said, he immediately asked in doubt. "That's exactly what I'm wondering about." Gandalf nodded and continued smoking his cigarette. The members of the expedition team have long seen Gandalf's erudition. Even Gandalf doesn't understand anything, and others naturally don't understand. Could it be that this kind of troll is afraid of the sun and often appears at night, but that doesn't mean it's afraid of the day? It doesn't come out in the sunny day, maybe it's just that he hates the day. Because at any time during the day the sun may appear, On rainy days, there is no such concern. After meditating, Morgan suddenly spoke. "Well, it makes sense. They can appear here, and only the possibility that Morgan said." Gandalf exhaled smoke and said affirmatively. "These rock trolls appear here, indicating that their caves should be nearby. I heard that many of these monsters like to collect things. Maybe we should go to their caves." After a puff of cigarette addiction, Gandalf put away the cigarette stick, looked up at the crowd and said. "It's so empathetic, I don't even need to speak." Hearing Gandalf's words, Morgan couldn't help giving Gandalf a compliment. "The things that monsters like to collect. We're definitely going to check it out. Maybe these monsters, like the dragon, like to collect treasures." "How do you know dragons like to collect treasure?" "I heard. Although I don't know, someone will definitely know. Gandalf, are you right?" "What?" "I said that dragons like to collect treasures. You must have seen the treasures of dragons, right?" Cough 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 cough. Maybe, yes." Watching the habitual bickering, the crowd began to disperse to find the cave of the rock troll. Morgan stood in the forest, looking left and right. Walk quickly in the direction the three trolls came from. The huge messy footprints clearly pointed out the direction for Morgan. Looking at the dwarves behind him who chose the same search direction as himself. Morgan's footsteps were fast, and he quickly distanced himself from the dwarves. And everyone in the expedition team seemed to be awakened by a sentence that the dwarves said unintentionally during the previous bickering: "Maybe these monsters, like giant dragons, like to collect treasures." So looking at the direction Morgan was heading in, the dwarves who followed consciously chose to deviate from the direction Morgan was looking for. Morgan turned his head to look at the little thoughts of the dwarves and grinned. "This is the best. although he wasn't sure if he could find the troll's hiding place before all the dwarves. But even if it wasn't him, Morgan is also bound to claim the high elf sword in the troll's cave. Because he has such qualifications. Morgan sprinted along the troll's giant footprint. When there were no other dwarves behind him, Morgan simply ran. Agility has been strengthened to LV2, his current speed is much faster than before. Fortunately, he chose the right direction. When standing in front of a deep and dark spacious cave, Morgan breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he was found by himself first. Next, it's harvest time. The corner of Morgan's mouth raised, he pulled out the long cross sword at his waist, and walked in. Chapter 29. Satisfied. Smelly. Very smelly. Smelly stink. The first sensation of stepping into a troll's dark cave was all Morgan had. Speaking of which, trolls also smell bad, fishy. But compared with the stench of the hole in front of him, it really pales in comparison. Morgan didn't even know the words to describe the stench of the cave. Anyway, it is not an exaggeration to describe the stench in this cave with the most stinky thing you can imagine. Morgan was a little dizzy from the smoke, and shook his head vigorously. Finally, he couldn't help but tore off a section of the long sleeves under the leather armor on his body. When both nostrils are stuffed with shredded clothes. After being unable to feel the taste of the outside world, Morgan felt a lot better. Only then did I have the thought to look at the surrounding environment in the cave. This cave is very large and very spacious. In fact, if you think about it, you know how the cave that can accommodate the 3 giant rock trolls is so small. The cave is spacious, and the cave is equally terrifying. Except for the grey-white road in the middle, which is fairly clean, there are various gnawed bones scattered everywhere around the road. The reason why this road is greyish-white, Morgan discovered after observing, it was formed by the sinking of crushed bones. Numerous skeletons belong to various animals, as well as humans. More than a dozen members of the expedition team are looking for the ogre's cave, which may be discovered by others at any time. Morgan made a quick observation and found no hidden danger. Then he strode straight into the depths of the cave. The deeper you go into the cave, the darker the light becomes. The stench was also stronger. Morgan, though his nose was stuffed with clothing, was very dull. But other senses are still exposed and can be felt naturally. Like the eyes of a second nose. As he walked deeper into the cave, Morgan began to feel a little discomfort in his eyes. This is really stinky to the eyes. The light was getting dimmer, and Morgan reckoned that he should have walked about 5 to 60 meters in the cave. But still can't see the end of the cave. In addition to seeing a few rusty long swords inserted obliquely into the soil halfway, Morgan saw little else of value. Morgan walked on. It didn't take long, this time he finally saw the end. Except for a large number of various weeds, hay, and a small amount of manure, Morgan didn't see a single silver coin. As for the high elf sword in his memory, there is no trace of it. This is the deepest part of the cave, and apparently where the trolls rest. But where is his great sword? Morgan looked left and right but couldn't find what he wanted, feeling a little irritable. After he discovered that the temporary camp was the one in the memory plot early in the morning. I've been thinking about copying the troll cave. Now that the trolls are all dead, the team has been pulled back to the track similar to the plot memory. Now he also took the lead in standing in the ogre's lair as he wished. I was thinking of taking this opportunity to make a fortune, but found that there was nothing. What I have been pondering for most of the day turned out to be a fantasy in the end. It's a headache for everyone. It's not hidden in these smelly weeds and hay. After looking around carefully, Morgan looked at the large weeds in front of him and thought seriously. Even if the nose is stuffed tightly, Morgan could also think of the stench of the surrounding environment, not to mention the grass where the trolls slept under him. What is that? Just when Morgan was about to rummage forward, suddenly, his eyes saw the side of the end, and there was still a road. It's just relatively narrow. At the same time, because of the dim surroundings, Morgan couldn't see very clearly. It's easy to miss the dim path ahead of you. Morgan stepped forward immediately. After crossing the path, a spacious stone cave appeared in front of Morgan. Then he saw a large number of gold coins and silver coins covered with dust and dirt scattered all over the ground. In addition to a large number of gold coins and silver coins, there is also a broken weapon rack covered in dust and cobwebs, with a few weapons scattered on it. Deep in the corner, an exquisite treasure chest half a meter long and wide was also half open, filled with gold coins and various gems. Finally found. Looking at the cave in front of him, Morgan looked joyful and heaved a sigh of relief. Then it's time to harvest. Morgan strode forward, walked straight to the dazzling exquisite treasure chest, and began to choose. It was impossible for Morgan to swallow such a whole box of treasures all by himself. Because he has nothing to put. Although you can dig a hole to bury the treasure chest like in the memory plot. But it will take time, because other members of the expedition may come over at any time. The second is that there are traces of the newly dug holes no matter how they are filled. Once they are discovered, it will be embarrassing. Thinking about the gold and silver wealth in the underground kingdom of Lonely Mountain in the memory plot, Morgan felt that it was too uneconomical to have conflicts with a group of dwarves over such a little thing. Besides, although the 3 trolls were all killed by his own arrows. But if there were not a group of dwarves risking their lives to pester and harass the trolls, it's hard to say whether Morgan can successfully kill a troll. What's more, he remembered the dwarf Boffer, and Bomber was seriously injured. Morgan couldn't just swallow these treasures all by himself. After picking out a purse of the most valuable gemstones of various crystal clear colors, Morgan stopped. Without hesitation, he walked to the weapon rack aside. There are several weapons stuck in a mess on it, but they are only covered by spider webs covered with a lot of dust. Can't see what kind of weapon it is. Morgan stretched out his hand to push away the spider web, and several weapons immediately revealed their true colors. A long sword in the shape of a cross sword, a single-edged weapon in the shape of a long knife, and a short sword. Morgan drew out the long cross sword, and opened his mouth to blow away the thick dust covering the long sword. Just at the first glance, he could see that the long sword in front of him far surpassed the saber he was wearing in terms of forging materials alone. The overall shape of the long sword is silvery white, its shape is exquisite and graceful, and it is full of high-end texture. Looking at the long sword in front of him, Morgan suddenly felt that it was not just a sword, but more like a work of art. In the Middle-earth world of cold weapons, there are not many races that can forge their own weapons. There are very few races that can forge such a weapon as a work of art. Wow! Morgan drew his long sword abruptly. The blade of the sword is also silvery white, as clean as new, with a cold light. Morgan put his finger close to the blade and immediately felt a tingling sensation. It was the incomparable sharpness of the sword pressing against the skin. Wow! The long sword is sheathed. Morgan was extremely satisfied, it's really a good sword. At this time, there was a sudden noise outside. This way. Chapter 30. Invasion. This way. Damn it, it stinks in here. I can hardly keep my eyes open. Is there really any treasure here? It's the end of the cave, why is there nothing? Wow, look at what we found, those big feces, the smelly and dirty thatch, and the bones left by them. Are these the treasures we are looking for? Where's Morgan? Damn it, I really can't stay here any longer. They've already come in, of course we have to look for them. Wait, there seems to be a way there. The messy footsteps and the mixed voices of the dwarves were particularly noisy in the extremely silent troll lair. Morgan listened briefly, then stopped paying attention. The entrance of this troll lair is very large, and there are many traces of activities belonging to trolls around it. As long as the expedition team is not stupid, they will definitely find this place. The difference is only the length of time to find it. Morgan had spent a little time outside at the end of the lair. It also took some time to select various gems in the exquisite treasure chest full of treasures in the corner. The expedition team arrived here a little faster than Morgan expected. Nor was he surprised. His gaze returned to the cross-shaped high elf sword in his hand. After simply wiping off the dust, the sword looks as clean as new. Morgan was very satisfied. So he casually took off the long sword of the guards that had been with him for more than 2 months and threw it on the ground. Then hung the high elf sword on his waist. It's finally here. Morgan patted the sword in satisfaction, looked back to the weapon rack again, and drew out the second single-edged long sword. Call. Morgan opened his mouth and blew. After the thick dust flew around, Morgan saw clearly that the shape in front of him was more like the ancient long sword of Huaxia, the earth where he lived in his previous life. Yes, even a weapon that is completely in the shape of a knife is also called a sword in this world. The whole body of the single-edged long sword is also silvery white. The color looked darker than the long sword hanging on Morgan's waist. It is also full of texture and high-level sense. Wow! Morgan jerked his long sword out. I saw no trace of dust on the flickering blade of the sword. Guang Guang just looked at such a blade. Morgan knew that this long sword was extremely sharp without trying it. This is also a weapon, but also a work of art. Good sword. Morgan couldn't help but sigh. Wow! The long sword is sheathed. At this time, the other members of the expedition finally came in. Morgan! How will you be here? It turns out Morgan is faster than us. I'll just say it. When the expedition team walked into the cave, the first thing they saw was Morgan holding a long sword, and he immediately yelled. Then at the second glance, I saw gold coins and silver coins scattered all over the floor, and, in the corner, the whole box of gold and silver treasures that made people dizzy. I don't think it's a good habit to let them lie on the ground. I think so too, it's too wasteful. Then let us clean them up for the master. Well, that's a good idea. The dwarves muttered as they stared at the gold and silver coins all over the floor. Immediately, these dwarves began to bend down to pick up the scattered gold and silver coins at an incomparable speed. A group of dwarves in front kept digging coins on the ground. Several main members including Gandalf, Thorin Oakenshield and Whitebeard Balin who followed behind walked in. Morgan was not surprised by the behavior of the group of dwarves. If he hadn't seen a lot of money in his previous life, he would not be short of money to spend, plus he knew the location of the mountain-like sea-like treasure in the Lonely Mountain in the memory plot. This is how you have enough eyesight, and have a certain immunity and determination to these treasures. For ordinary people to see so many gold treasures for the first time, no one can calm down. Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield are obviously not in this case. Just glanced at the whole little thing, and immediately put his eyes on Morgan. Gandalf. Seeing Gandalf walking in, Morgan raised his hand and threw the single-edged long sword in his hand. Sarling. After throwing a sword, Morgan drew out the last shorter sword stuck in the dusty weapon rack again, and threw it at Thorin Oakenshield, who was closely behind Gandalf. It's not like a weapon that a troll can forge. Thorin Oakenshield took the dagger, looked it up in his hand, and immediately spoke. He came from a noble family and had extraordinary knowledge, so he easily noticed that the sword Morgan threw to him was not ordinary. It doesn't look like it was forged by a human blacksmith. Gandalf nodded to answer, looked at the single-edged sword for a while, and then slowly drew out the blade. They were forged in Gondolin. Forged by the High Elves of the First Age. Staring at the imprint on the hilt of the sword, Gandalf slowly spoke of the place where the long sword was forged and the master who forged the long sword. Gandalf said and looked up at the two of them. Unexpectedly, Thorin Oakenshield immediately inserted the drawn dagger back into the scabbard when he heard his words. After the dispute in the morning, Gandalf didn't understand what Thorin Oakenshield cared about, and quickly said in a deep voice. This is the best weapon in the world, there is no better weapon than this. Hearing Gandalf's words, Thorin Oakenshield was obviously hesitant. At this time, Morgan picked up the sword hanging on his waist and gestured to Thorin Oakenshield. Thorin Oakenshield didn't care about the fact that the dagger in his hand was forged by an elf, and drew out the dagger. The blade is sensitive to light, clean as new, and sharp. Looking at such a sword blade, a smile appeared on the face of Thorin Oakenshield, who knew the goods. The biggest gain this time is it. Morgan walked towards the two of them with the elf sword. Indeed. Gandalf put away the long sword with a smile, took the long sword handed by Morgan, looked at it carefully, and returned it to Morgan after saying a few words. The dwarves on the side have already cleaned up the gold and silver coins scattered on the ground, and stuffed them all into the exquisite treasure chest. How should we allocate? It's not easy, of course it is shared equally by everyone. Good idea, should we share it now? We still have a long journey, it's inconvenient to carry these, why don't we bury them and come back later to get them? It's really inconvenient to carry, besides, we don't need it now. Okay, I think it's fine. Then let's do it. A group of dwarves discussed the distribution of treasures. Seeing that the main members of the team are not expressing their opinions. So a unanimous decision was quickly reached to bury the treasure chest. When the expedition team completely ransacked the lairs of the three trolls. On the way back to the temporary camp. Suddenly, a low and terrifying howl sounded again. The faces of all members of the expedition team suddenly changed. Chapter 31. Worst case. Last night, I just fought a half-orc who sneaked up in the middle of the night. The members of the expedition team have a deep memory of such howls. It's the howling of an orc warg. The half-orc crowd is not far from here. Gandalf spoke in a deep voice, and then quickly extinguished the cigarette rod in his mouth and put it away. Let's go back to camp. Thorin Oakenshield's face was gloomy, and he spoke immediately. We must return to the camp immediately, our rations and horses are all there. Even without the goblins, we can't go very far without food and horses. Gandalf immediately nodded and added. Go. Others also know the seriousness of the matter. Needless to say, the group immediately accelerated to the temporary camp. Ow! Ow! There were more and more clear howls. The faces of everyone in the expedition team were as heavy as water. After the battle last night, everyone has seen the horror and ferocity of the orcs. This time they made a comeback. Just listening to the howling, one knew that the scale of the orcs' attack was definitely not small. Quickly! Thorin Oakenshield urged loudly. Among all the members of the expedition, even Gandalf included, no one knew better than Thorin Oakenshield how terrifying a large-scale orc army was. There are only a few people on my own side, once they are surrounded by half-orc troops. He couldn't even imagine the horrible consequences that would be. The clearer the howl of the half-orc warg, the closer the distance between the half-orc and the group was. Compared with the clarity of the direction from the howling of wolves, Thorin Oakenshield's complexion became more and more gloomy. He had a very bad premonition, and he hoped it was still too late. Fast! Thorin Oakenshield took the lead and rushed towards the temporary camp. The 3 rock troll lairs are not far from the temporary camp. Less than half an hour. The expedition team saw from a distance the rain shelter tents set up by everyone in the temporary camp. Just as everyone breathed a sigh of relief, they were glad that the temporary camp hadn't been found by the orcs yet. Suddenly, a half-orc riding on the back of a tall wolf came out of the most conspicuous tent. Coincidentally, the half-orc raised his head and looked over here. No, get down! Thorin Oakenshield immediately squatted down and shouted in a low voice. It's just that the dwarves at the back of the team, such as Pang Bonulai, were obviously half a beat behind. The half-orc who found the trace of the dwarf immediately pointed in the direction of the expedition members and shouted. Immediately afterwards, several orcs riding on the wolf rushed out of the tent. Then, the low horn was sounded. Immediately around the forest came the howling of wargs, one after another. If you listen carefully, you can feel that these voices are constantly approaching the crowd. At this time, the half-orcs in the temporary camp also rushed towards everyone's location frantically. The camp is occupied. We should have been discovered too. The tall and long-legged Gandalf was the first to see the half-orc wolf cavalry rushing from a distance. He shook his head quickly, and turned to look at Thorin Oakenshield, who was still weighing and hesitating. Gandalf immediately said seriously, Shorin, we should go. Thorin Oakenshield didn't know that the group of people had been discovered by the half-orcs, so he was more aware of the current danger. Just this walk is tantamount to completely losing the dry food package and the horses. The expedition team is able to escape the hunt of the orcs. I am afraid that this journey to the Lonely Mountain will be difficult to continue. This was what he was most worried about before. Unexpectedly, everyone rushed back desperately, but it was still a step too late. I'm really unhappy. Thorin Oakenshield looked resentful, so he gritted his teeth and said, let's go. After the words fell, Thorin Oakenshield immediately turned around, thinking about the direction where the 3 ogre lairs were before running wildly. A group of people have just walked in this direction, and it is almost the safest road in the forest right now. Ow! The terrifying howls of wargs continued to come from all directions. In the forest, the figures of the expedition team were running for their lives. It's just that the 2-legged people obviously couldn't run the Gundaba wolf in the forest like walking on the ground. Not long after, the roar of more than 20 warg cavalry rushing out of the temporary camp sounded from behind the expedition team. The first orcs came after them. Thorin Oakenshield turned his head to look at the orc warg cavalry who were already close behind him, and immediately stopped in an emergency. Turning his head, looking at the menacing half-orcs in the distance, he drew out his dagger and pointed at the incoming half-orc cavalry and shouted, Kill them! Kill them! Kill these dirty bastards! Revenge for the clansmen who died! Kill these monsters! The dwarves immediately responded to Thorin Oakenshield's call, waving their weapons and shouting excitedly. The dwarves cursed, and their movements were not slow at all. A dozen or so dwarves immediately formed a posture to meet the enemy. Bilbo, who was a little flustered, and the dwarves Boffer and Bombur, who were seriously injured in the siege of the 3 trolls, were all surrounded by a group of dwarves. Although the dwarves often teased and laughed at Bilbo, but at critical times, the dwarves are still very trustworthy. The members of the expedition were divided into 2 teams to meet the enemy. Thorin Oakenshield led all the dwarves to meet the enemy. Morgan stood with Gandalf again. The two are strong, and their abilities can complement each other. Fighting side by side can maximize their combat power and be safer. Bang bang bang! The momentum of dozens of wolves running wildly together was extremely ferocious. The master has an order to kill all these dwarf bastards. The distance was getting closer and closer, and the leading tall and ferocious orc warg cavalry finally roared. Kill all the dwarven bastards! Kill all the dwarven bastards! A group of half-orcs who followed immediately laughed and screamed, brandishing their weapons and rushing towards the expedition team. It's quite exciting to shout, "You will be the first one today." Morgan raised his bow and set his arrows, staring calmly at the leader. The tall orc sitting on the tall wolf with a grinning face muttered, and moved his fingers immediately. Whoosh! An arrow immediately flew over the expedition team, and shot straight at the incoming orcs. The tall, leading orc who was bending over and riding on the wolf with a grin on his face immediately paled. Immediately afterwards, the whole body tilted to one side, and fell straight onto the wolf's back. The leading wolf was still running forward, but for some reason he suddenly felt a lot lighter on his back. The wolf's IQ is not high enough to tell the difference, but the wolf cavalry who followed the little leader were obviously taken aback when they saw the boss fall down on the wolf's back. But immediately, even more anger rose in the hearts of the orc-wolf cavalry who reacted, roaring and rushing towards the expedition team without any change in momentum. Chapter 32. If the archer has a level. Kill all the dwarven bastards! Kill all the dwarven bastards! Led by the second youngest leader, the half-orc wolf cavalry rushed towards the expedition team roaring and roaring. The dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield looked serious, ready to fight. Morgan and Gandalf, who stood behind the dwarf team, looked relatively calm. Especially Morgan. Watching a new tall and strong half-orc in the half-orc cavalry team shouting orders to other half-orcs. Morgan had clearly seen it just now, when the other party saw the former little orc leader shot to death by himself and fell on the back of the wolf. A smile was evident on his face, although it was a ferocious one. But Morgan can still clearly see the joy of the other party. Is this the excitement of seeing the leader die, and it's finally my turn to take over? If this is the case, then you are too happy to be happy, and I want to congratulate your next one. Looking at the menacing orc-wolf cavalry team that is about to rush up, Morgan murmured quite interestingly, he liked the sense of accomplishment of being able to control the life and death of the enemy at will from a long distance. Morgan reached for the quiver. This time, he pulled out 3 arrows at once. Closer, closer. Finally, the attacking team of half-orc warg cavalry slammed into the dwarf expedition team led by Thorin Oakenshield fiercely. And 1 second before the wolf cavalry was about to rush up, Morgan let go of the arrow. Whoosh whoosh. 3 arrows shot towards the orc-wolf cavalry rapidly. After a third of a second, the 3 half-orcs rushing towards them immediately let out a muffled grunt, and immediately became unstable and fell to the back of the warg. Among them is the little orc leader who just emerged as the leader. Bang 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 bang! A team of more than 20 half-orc wolf knights charged fiercely at the dwarf expedition team of more than a dozen people. The momentum is so fierce that it does not lose to a larger battlefield. However, the wolf knight of the half-orc is different from the cavalry knight of other intelligent races. Because the wolf under the half-orc is more ferocious than the half-orc. Kill! The dwarves roared and brandished their weapons in desperate resistance. Morgan stood beside Gandalf, the longbow in his hand was drawn continuously. Each arrow is like the most brutal and ruthless killer. The orcs and wargs on the battlefield in front of them are far inferior to the giant trolls with rough skin and thick flesh. All orcs and wargs shot by Morgan had almost no chance of standing up again. Because every arrow of Morgan shot at the deadliest head of orcs and wargs. It was different from the night attack encounter with the orc scout team a day ago. In that battle, in order to gain soul power, Morgan tried his best to kill more enemies. Now, Morgan has a better understanding of the role of the archer. When the balance of victory on the battlefield is on his side, he must of course do his best to kill the enemy in order to obtain soul power to the greatest extent. And when the outcome of the battlefield is unclear, or even in jeopardy, what Morgan has to do is not only to kill a large number of enemies, but also to protect his teammates with all his strength. Like now, with the help of the melee wizard Gandalf under cover. Morgan's eyes were almost entirely on the members of the dwarf expedition team who were fighting bloody battles ahead. As long as he sees which dwarf is in danger, Morgan can always help the other party at the first time. Although part of the soul power will definitely be sacrificed, protecting the casualties of the expedition team members is also protecting oneself. Morgan is very self-aware, and there are no members of the expedition team who are fighting desperately. If he is surrounded by half-orcs, there is only one end for him, and that is death. He is far from growing to the point where one man can fight an entire army. If the archers have ranks. Well, Morgan thinks something like this. A qualified archer can kill the enemy more efficiently on the battlefield. An excellent archer can not only kill a large number of enemies on the battlefield, but also protect himself and his teammates to a certain extent. A master-level archer can not only kill a large number of enemies, but even influence the outcome of a battle to a certain extent. The higher-level archers, just appearing on the battlefield, can deter the enemy leaders like nuclear weapons, making the enemy dare not act rashly. Because he could easily shoot anyone if he wanted to. His existence threatened everyone in the enemy at any time, especially the enemy leader. However, when an archer reaches that level of strength, he can no longer be called an archer. That's a marksman. Going up, if there is an existence stronger than the sharpshooter. That must be the legendary god of archers. Now Morgan has initially reached the standard of an excellent archer, and is working hard to climb the road to a master archer. Look down. Morgan, who had mutual horns with Gandalf, suddenly shouted in a low voice. Gandalf kicked over the entangled orcs, and immediately bowed his head knowingly. Next second. Whoosh! An arrow almost shot past the pointed hood of Gandalf's head. After a muffled hum, Gandalf turned his head immediately, and saw a tall and strong half-orc holding a mace-shaped weapon, with an arrow in his eyebrows falling backwards. Gandalf didn't care, and pierced the orc who rushed up again with his sword. The other wand slammed at Morgan, whose back was turned to him. Bang! A white shimmer flickered. The invisible magical energy exploded. A half-orc trying to attack Morgan was knocked away by Gandalf with a stick. Morgan shot dead a warg who was sneaking up on Thorin Oakenshield with an arrow. He turned around and smiled at Gandalf who had saved him. Gandalf ignored it directly, turned around and continued to deal with the incoming wolf. This kid's performance today is much more majestic than himself. No, it's not just about being more powerful than yourself, this kid's performance today is more powerful than anyone else in the team. Gandalf muttered to himself. Not only Gandalf, but also the other dwarves who were saved by Morgan today think so. In fact, think about it. Get sneaked up in the back as you battle vicious enemies. But if someone suddenly kills the attacker and saves you from danger, you will naturally be grateful to the other party. Especially when the other party saved you more than once. More than 20 half-orc warg knights dealt with 16 expedition members. Although the half-orcs had a small advantage in numbers, they quickly lost troops when the expedition team's individual combat power was more elite. In just a few minutes, more than half of the 20 orc wolf cavalry were killed or injured. If this is normal, the remaining half-orcs may have been scared away. Half-orcs don't have the spiritual awareness of fighting to the death and never retreating. Only under extremely strict high-pressure orders, these half-orcs can resist the fear of death and continue to fight. Ow! Horror howls continued to be heard in the distance. This meant that orc reinforcements were on their way. Hearing the howling sound that became clearer, he looked at the remaining half-orcs who showed fear but still did not retreat. Thorin Oakenshield yelled anxiously, "Orc reinforcements will arrive soon, kill them all." Kill. Chapter 33. Gandalf's routine. Kill. The dwarves, armed with short swords, hatchets, and warhammers, rushed at the remaining half-orcs. Seemingly aware that Morgan was watching over them, the dwarves grew braver. Under Morgan's influence, Keely, the dwarf who had been aiming at the nearest and easiest target, also began to follow Morgan's example. Turn your attention to the expedition team partners. It's just that half-orcs and wargs who can't hurt their partners, but can accurately shoot or seriously wound and entangle with dwarves require high skills. Not only must the archer have a sufficient hit rate, but also shoot at various tricky angles without shaking hands. Otherwise, it is not saving people but killing people. Of course, only Keely who is sure will shoot arrows, and he will not shoot arrows indiscriminately if he is not sure. He is not stupid. Under the counterattack of the dwarves led by Thorin Oakenshield, the remaining half of the orcs and wargs soon suffered heavy casualties. The remaining half-orcs finally felt the fear. The fear of death at hand overwhelmed the fear of death threatened verbally by superiors. The orcs began to turn and flee. It seems to be influenced by the fleeing orcs. The Gundaba wolf, who had been fearless before death, also started to flee backwards. Morgan drew his 2 arrows, drew his bow, and shot. Whoosh! 2 whistling piercing sounds sounded one after another. A fleeing half-orc got an arrow in the back of his head and fell heavily to the ground. Another arrow hit the rear of the fleeing warg. The wolf's speed was too fast, and the wolf that was hit in the buttock was even faster, but let out a scream, and ran away quickly. When Keely flipped behind the slowest half-orc with an arrow. Thorin Oakenshield didn't care about the orcs and wargs fleeing away, and hurriedly said, "Let's go." Horror howls from a distance continued to sound. Orc reinforcements could catch up at any moment. The encounter lasted less than 10 minutes before and after, short and intense. All the members knew the danger at this time, they were too tired to rest, and they didn't care to bandage when they were injured. The crowd followed and ran quickly into the depths of the forest. Quick, quicker! Thorin Oakenshield, who was running at the forefront, kept urging the dwarves behind him. When a group of people rushed to the vicinity of the 3 troll caves. There are 2 slightly clear forks in the forest. Without thinking, Thorin Oakenshield went straight to the right, which seemed to be farther from the orc behind him. And many more. Gandalf spoke suddenly. Thorin Oakenshield immediately stopped, and immediately turned to look at Gandalf. Although he knew that Gandalf had different opinions from himself in some respects. But it is by no means a person who makes trouble for no reason, let alone at such a critical moment. The eyes of the other members also immediately focused on Gandalf. In the distance, the horrifying howls of the Gundaba wargs were still heard, and they were still very clear. No time to explain, this way. Knowing that everyone was waiting for him, Gandalf looked at the left and right roads carefully, and immediately pointed to the left road that Thorin Oakenshield chose. After Gandalf finished speaking, he looked at Thorin Oakenshield, and the whole group also looked at Thorin at this time. "Listen to you, go." Thorin Oakenshield reacted decisively, and nodded immediately when Gandalf looked over. As long as it doesn't involve the dwarves' principled issues and bottom line in treating the elves. Thorin Oakenshield has the rarest quality to be a good dwarf king. That is to be able to listen to the opinions of subordinates or other people, as long as the other party is right. For an important partner like the wizard Gandalf, Thorin Oakenshield can also give him enough trust. Even in this critical situation. Although he knew better that a wizard possessed many strange abilities. Perhaps that was why Gandalf spoke now. "Walk." "See Thorin." Oakenshield nodded. Without hesitation, Gandalf immediately led the forest on the left and walked quickly. A group of people followed Gandalf and ran quickly through the forest. Ow! Behind him was the horrific howl that lingered. It's just that the howling sounds seemed to be farther away than before. This made the members of the expedition team feel a little calmer. After half an hour, the members of the expedition team who were running wildly saw a light appearing in the distance. It turned out that he was about to leave the forest. The howling of the wolf behind him gradually faded away, and the forest was at the end of the front again, as if he was about to escape the chase of the orcs. But Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield didn't say anything, they just strode forward. The other dwarves wanted to say something nasty. But now is the critical time to avoid the orcs' pursuit. Seeing that everyone looked very serious, the dwarf who wanted to speak had no choice but to hold back his coquettish words. The expedition team continued to advance in the forest. 10 minutes later, the expedition broke out of this vast forest. Outside are rolling bare hills. Seems to be for her safety. After rushing out of the forest, Gandalf did not lead everyone away from the forest immediately, but continued to move forward at the edge of the forest. The advantage of this is that once a large number of orcs catch up, the team was able to retreat into the forest in time to escape. The result is very different in the bare wilderness than in the lush forest surrounded by orcs. If it was the latter, the expedition team would be no match and still have a chance to escape. And if it's the former, it's very dangerous. The expedition continued along the edge of the forest. Not long after, the group saw a vast stone forest appearing in the distance. Finally, Gandalf, whose face remained unchanged, showed a gleam of joy, which was caught by the parallel Morgan. The joy flashed away, and Gandalf continued to lead the crowd towards the stone forest with his usual expression. Although Thorin Oakenshield was a little puzzled, Gandalf didn't say anything along the way. But out of trust in Gandalf, he didn't ask too much. A group of people headed towards the stone forest. At this time, a troop of half-orc wolf cavalry suddenly rushed out of the hills behind. From a distance, a group of dwarves who were looking for it appeared in front of them. The half-orcs were immediately excited and screamed strangely. The moment the half-orcs appeared, their figures were quickly spotted by Oli, the dwarf who liked to look around along the way. "Half-orc, there!" The dwarf Ori quickly shouted. The entire expedition team was alarmed immediately, and immediately looked in the direction of Oli. A large group of heavily armed orc wolf cavalry has already begun to charge here. At present, the number reached at least 100 or 200 half-orc cavalry, which was far from what the 20 or 30 wolf cavalry could match. What's more, everyone is now on a bare hilly mountain road. Such an unobstructed mountainous area is completely like walking on flat ground to the Gundaba wolf. The complexions of the people who had relaxed just now changed drastically. Gandalf shouted decisively, "Quick! Follow up! Everyone follow!" Gandalf roared and accelerated towards the stone forest. Thorin Oakenshield wondered why Gandalf didn't choose the forest that was closer to hide, but the vast stone forest farther away. But at this time is extremely urgent. Called by Gandalf, the members of the expedition immediately followed Gandalf and rushed towards the stone forest. Thorin Oakenshield knew that asking more questions at this time would be a waste of precious escape time. So he didn't ask any questions, and immediately followed Gandalf and ran towards the stone forest. Chapter 34. Lost. Oh 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 oh! The half-orc wolf cavalry screamed excitedly and rushed towards the expedition team. The slender and tall Gundaba warg ran extremely fast on the rolling bare hills. In just a short period of time, the distance with everyone has been greatly shortened. Quick! Gandalf turned his head and howled as he ran. There is still a long way to go to the stone forest in front of him. If the orc army overtakes him, the consequences will be terrible. Quick, quicker! The orc army was approaching rapidly, and Thorin Oakenshield immediately followed suit. At this time, you can see the gap between everyone's speed and endurance. Not long ago, there was a fierce battle in the forest. This was followed by nearly an hour of high-intensity running. Although all the members of the expedition team were not left behind, the difference in physical endurance was still easy to distinguish. Impressively at the forefront of the team at this time were Gandalf and Morgan. It is understandable that Morgan is fast. After all, he is young and has undergone system enhancement before. The agility of LV2 is not a joke. But when it comes to physical strength, although Morgan can be ranked in the forefront of the expedition team, he is by no means the best one. Thorin Oakenshield and Dwarf Dwellin, the two most powerful of the dwarves, may not be as fast as Morgan, but when it comes to physical strength, they will only be stronger than Morgan, not weaker. Of course, as long as Morgan continues to strengthen his physique, it will be a simple matter to surpass these two. Morgan is understandably fast. But Gandalf looked very old, with all white hair and beard. He could still run so fast, and he seemed a little calm and breezy while running wildly along the way. It made everyone a little confused. But it's not surprising if you think about the abilities of the wizard. Only behind Gandalf Morgan were the brothers Keely and Philly the dwarf, and the younger brothers Bilbo. As for the other members, it's pretty much the same at this time. Bomber, the biggest dwarf, and Boffer, who usually talked a lot, ran in the back. Although Thorin Oakenshield seemed to be running relatively backward at this time. But looking at the other party's face with ease, and the voices that kept urging the other dwarves, it was clear that he had intentions. Quickly! Behind them was a large group of ferocious orc troops, and the members of the expedition team really used all their strength to run wildly. All of them were running red-faced and out of breath. It's just that the speed of the group couldn't run past the warg after all. When everyone was getting closer and closer to the vast stone forest in front of them, they were about to approach the stone forest. The leading scout cavalry in the orc army finally caught up. Thorin Oakenshield looked anxiously at the wolf cavalry who were approaching quickly, and could only shout loudly, "Morgan, Keely!" When Morgan, who was running wildly, heard Thorin Oakenshield's voice, he had already reached out and grabbed the quiver behind him. The moment he turned around, he drew 2 arrows and put them on the longbow. Whizzing! The 2 arrows shot rapidly behind him. Next second, an arrow hit the ugly head of the half-orc who ran wildly at the front and screamed the most fiercely. Another arrow landed on the head of the ferocious warg that had been shot in the orc's crotch. In an instant, the leading riding wolf and half-orc immediately fell to the ground. The few wargs following immediately rolled into a ball. At this time, Keely's arrow also arrived. He overturned a half-orc scout sitting on a wolf who escaped in time, and fell to the ground. It was blocked by the arrows of Morgan and Keely. The half-orc wolf troops that had already rushed up were immediately pulled back a distance. The expedition team finally rushed into the vast stone forest ahead as they wished. There are big and small broken ones, round, square, triangular and even deformed ones, stones of various sizes and shapes. Gandalf rushed into the stone forest without saying a word, and his footsteps did not slow down in the slightest. A group of members of the expedition had no choice but to continue running wildly behind. Quick! Faster! Thorin Oakenshield behind the team kept looking back, urging everyone to speed up. Rushing into the stone forest can only temporarily delay the speed of the orc troops catching up. But that doesn't mean the whole group is safe. Although Thorin Oakenshield didn't know what plan he had for Gandalf, nor did he know how to get rid of the orcs this time. This made Thorin Oakenshield, who was in control of most things most of the time, a little uncomfortable. But according to Gandalf's performance along the way, he believed in Gandalf, and he could only trust Gandalf. Quick! This way! Gandalf nimbly led the way, leading the crowd through the stone forest. This stone forest is very vast, and the expedition team was led by Gandalf to turn left and right. The half-orcs who followed were a little behind, and the expedition team could not be found. The direction of pursuit can only be determined by the scent smelled by the warg's sensitive nose and the movement heard. Unable to see the orc behind them, the sense of urgency in the hearts of the members relaxed a little. But Gandalf was still leading the crowd around the stone forest. Others still only thought that this was Gandalf leading the crowd to get rid of the chase of the orcs behind him. But only Morgan thought that Gandalf might be lost. For he noticed that Gandalf was staring visibly at the surrounding stones every time he turned a corner. Morgan knew that the other party should be identifying the direction. But when Gandalf began to frown constantly, the wrinkles on his old face rolled up, and an eager look flashed in his eyes. Only then did Morgan realize that he must have lost his way. However, Gandalf's acting skills are excellent, except that they are parallel, and Morgan, who has been paying attention to him, has noticed something strange. The dwarves found nothing out of the ordinary. Fortunately, after entering the stone forest, the orc troops slowed down significantly. This stone forest is also big enough. Gandalf led the crowd around corners, and the orc troops couldn't catch up for a while. But the half-orcs have a wolf. If Gandalf can't find a way out in time, it will be a matter of time before he is caught up. Morgan knew what Gandalf was planning. But he couldn't speak at all. What's more, the vast stone forest in front of me is much different from the hills with few boulders in the memory plot. Morgan couldn't help either, there was nothing he could do. The expedition team continued to follow Gandalf and circled in the stone forest. The howling of the warg behind him was getting closer. Maybe it was the right path, or maybe the expedition team was lucky, or maybe it was fate. After taking a normal turn, Gandalf finally saw a small stone mountain composed of 3 huge boulders several meters high. Gandalf's eyes lit up, and he rushed forward quickly, scanning the surroundings quickly. Finally decided what I was looking for is here. Quick! Here! Gandalf pointed to a small but deep and dark cavern in the boulder and shouted to the crowd. Morgan didn't enter immediately, but stood beside Gandalf with a longbow and nocking an arrow, in a defensive posture. The dwarves trusted Gandalf very much, and without any hesitation, they slid into the cave one by one. When the dwarf Keely followed Thorin Oakenshield entered the cave. Morgan was about to go in. Suddenly, there was a deafening sound of horseshoes outside. Orc mounts are not horses. Morgan thought of something and just wanted to speak out, when Gandalf pushed behind him, "Come in." Immediately, he slid into the dark cave. Chapter 35. Rivendell. What? Morgan, you crushed my wound. Sorry, I didn't know you were down there. Pangbo, I can't breathe under you, you should lose weight. I'm hurt, it's not my fault. Damn it, Philly, something on you hit me. In the dark cave, a group of members of the expedition team who had just slipped down from the upper hole huddled together. When one by one stood up, Gandalf began to count the heads. 1, 2, 3, 44, 15. Why are there only 15, who is missing? Gandalf quickly looked to the left and right after clicking. Bilbo said suddenly, Gandalf, you've missed yourself. Oh, yes, I'm confused. Gandalf patted Bilbo on the shoulder and smiled. At this moment, a dwarf suddenly asked, I don't seem to have heard the barking of those wargs, can we rest for a while? No. Of course not. Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield spoke at the same time. We are not too far away from the half-orcs now. Those Gundabal-wargs have very sensitive noses, and they may come here at any time. It's better to leave here first, and rest until it is completely safe. Gandalf went on. Thorin Oakenshield didn't say a word, apparently thinking the same way. Soon, the expedition team continued on the road. But this time instead of the hilly mountain forest, it was replaced by a narrow stone road. Gandalf continued to lead the way, Morgan at his side. This stone path is dark and narrow. When at the entrance of the cave, it can still be reflected by the light from above, so it is not too dark. It gets darker and darker. Finally, after walking 40 meters, the narrow path finally became pitch black. It's too dark here, Gandalf, can you brighten it up? Or Dori, the dwarf who has always been the most curious about wizards, asked intimately. Gandalf said nothing, but took his staff to his mouth, and blew at the black crystal set at the top of the staff. The black crystal soon emitted a faint light. It's not bright enough, Gandalf, can you make it brighter? Dori the dwarf continued to speak earnestly. Gandalf was a little helpless, it's only so bright. Okay. Dolly was no longer entangled. Gandalf continued on with his shimmering staff in hand. With the illumination of the staff, the speed of the group accelerated a lot. The stone road gets darker and narrower as it goes forward. 10 minutes later, Morgan followed Gandalf to a low cave. Although the stone path beside him was narrow, Morgan's strong body could barely pass it. But the cave that appeared in front of him made Morgan a little dizzy. This cave that should belong to natural formation is too small. Morgan made a gesture with his hand, almost only a little bigger than his body. The hole was small and dark. If this is a person with dark phobia, I am afraid that he will not even have the courage to stand in front of this cave. Just looking at it, I already feel a sense of depression rushing over my face. What happened ahead? Are you going out? At this time, the voices of the dwarves came from behind. The distance between the two sides of this long and narrow stone road is only enough for one person to walk at this time. Stopping in front, the whole team is equivalent to being blocked. It'll be fine soon. It's very fast to go out, and it's enough to climb for a while. Gandalf's reply at once caught the attention of the dwarves. The dwarf in front was okay, and he saw the entrance of the cave with the faint light from the staff. The dwarves behind were a little confused about what Gandalf meant by climbing a distance. The dwarf behind continued to ask questions. Gandalf didn't answer any more, but looked at Morgan, who was looking a bit uneasy, and asked, "What, uncomfortable?" Morgan shook his head, "No, I just don't like to be in such an environment. In fact, if you think about it, you know that in the already narrow dark stone passage, you have to drill into an even narrower dark cave. Just imagining it is already depressing." Hearing Morgan's words, Gandalf couldn't help being stunned. He really didn't expect Morgan to be so good at archery, but he hadn't gotten used to this environment yet. "It's okay, just go through it a few more times." Seeing that Morgan didn't seem to be joking, Gandalf reached out and patted Morgan's shoulder to comfort him. After finishing speaking, he lowered his head, bent over, and then the cat crawled into the dark cave with his body on his body. Although Morgan felt uncomfortable in his heart, he was definitely not a hypocritical person. Following closely behind Gandalf, he bent down and got in. There is more than one feeling of depression that Morgan feels. It's just that the leading Gandalf and Morgan have already gone in. The dwarves had no choice but to follow. Although the dwarves are small in stature, their horizontal physique is no weaker than Morgan's. Especially the bloated dwarf Bomber. One by one, the dwarves crawled into the cave. When it was Bomber's turn, he finally ran into difficulties. No sooner had he entered the hole than Bomber got stuck. In the end, he could only take off all the clothes and leather armor on Bomber's body. Bomber was only wearing a pair of big underpants, which were regarded as underwear, and barely squeezed into the cave. It's just that Dori, the dwarf who was struggling behind Pangburrow, wanted to keep pushing Pangburrow forward. I dawdled for a while. The expedition team finally all entered the cave. In the dark, narrow, cramped cave, it slowly squirmed forward like maggots. The dwarf Boffer finally couldn't help but said, "Such a small cave reminds me of a mine." "You said, what if this collapses?" "To shut up." "Damn it, shut up Boffer." Boffer's words stirred up thousands of waves, and the dwarves immediately shouted in anger. "Okay, I'll shut up. I'm just saying what you dare not say. Besides, it's not like our mines haven't collapsed before." Boffer's voice was getting quieter. Although he knew that he had said the wrong thing and provoked the anger of the public, he still spoke out what was in his heart, unwilling to admit defeat. "Shut your stinky mouth! Damn it, shut up, boffer! You kid is getting more and more annoying." The dwarves attack Boffer, who said something wrong. The suddenly noisy atmosphere in the dark cave made Morgan feel a lot more relaxed from his suppressed emotions. Morgan took a few breaths, looked up at Gandalf in front of him, and said, "Gandalf, how long before we can go out?" "There is still a while." "Are you all right, Morgan?" "It's okay, I'll ask." "On the next cave tour, there are chattering dwarves to make adjustments." Gandalf chatted with Morgan from time to time. This gave Morgan a great relief from the oppressive feeling he was feeling. Time passed slowly. When a bright light finally appeared in front of the cave. This dark, cramped, depressing cave finally came to an end. "Ah, it's finally out. I have never been so yearning for the light today. It's good to be alive." The moment when the members of the expedition crawled out of the cave with groans and stood outside the cave. Everyone was stunned. Ask for a ticket. Chapter 36. Compromise. My God! This is where? Am I dreaming? Or are we all dreaming? I must have come to the world of fairy tales. Looking at the scene in front of him. Everyone was stunned. What appeared before the eyes of the expedition members was a valley. A huge valley surrounded by raging rivers. In the distance, one after another majestic waterfalls poured down from the towering peaks, arousing the rising mist, and under the sunshine of autumn, forming long-term rainbows across the valley. The valley is surrounded by steep cliffs. A big river rushes down, surrounding the fantastic valley in the center day and night. A series of tower-like buildings with exquisite and powerful shapes stand up one after another. The building with white gold as the main body is constructed in trapezoidal steps, interlocking and extending upwards. The most traditional and exquisite fantasy-style architecture. There are a lot of green trees, fountains, gardens, and squares dotted in the middle. From a distance, this is definitely a dreamy valley that can only appear in fairy tales. And the castle in the center is the most beautiful hanging garden in the world. Even though Morgan knew where he was, and was prepared in his heart, he was still shocked by the scene in front of him. From his birth to the present, the huge valley in front of him has amazed him more than any city buildings he has seen before. In my previous life, because of my occupation, flying around the world was normal. Whether it was created in the previous life, it was amazed by the whole world, and the architectural landscape with exaggerated difficulty. It is still a natural feature that has been carefully carved and is said to be naturally formed. In his opinion, it is far from what is in front of him. At this moment, he realized that this kind of place, which is comparable to the legendary paradise and fairy tale, really exists. Everyone looked at the scenery in front of them in amazement. Except for one person. The moment Thorin Oakenshield saw the scene in front of him clearly, his complexion immediately became gloomy. As the minister of the former Yamashita kingdom, he is now the king of the Turin dwarves. Although Thorin Oakenshield has never really been here. But I also heard about this place more than once from books and other people. Then think of what the other party said when he quarreled with Gandalf not long ago. And before Gandalf volunteered to lead the way. Thorin Oakenshield reacted almost instantly. Just about to open his mouth to settle accounts with Gandalf. But saw Gandalf speak first. The Valley of the Imlaris. But usually he has another name, does any of you know? Gandalf looked at the introduction of the amazed people, and asked them with a smile. Turning his eyes away from the beautiful scenery in the distance, Morgan smiled and said, "Rivendell." "Yes, this is Rivendell. If the east coast of the Middle-earth world is the safest and most comfortable place, it must be here." Gandalf smiled and continued to introduce. Thorin Oakenshield finally couldn't bear it any longer, and stepped forward to question, "Is this the plan you've always planned? Seeking refuge from our enemies?" Gandalf seemed to have expected Thorin Oakenshield to have such a reaction. He just shook his head calmly and said, "There are no enemies here, Thorin Oakenshield. The only hostility you can find in this valley is the hostility you bring yourself." Gandalf spoke calmly. Everyone can understand the meaning of the words. Notice the difference between the two. The other members of the expedition immediately became quiet consciously. It seems to be aware of the problem with his tone. Thorin Oakenshield took a deep breath, tried his best to calm down and said, "Do you think the elves will bless our adventure?" "No, they will only try to stop us." Gandalf still said calmly, Of course, they will. But we have questions to answer. Soren, we haven't been able to figure out the secrets on the map yet. You know what that means. After Gandalf finished speaking, Thorin Oakenshield fell silent immediately. Yes, the secret that leads to the depths of the Lonely Mountain is hidden on the map of the Lonely Mountain, which is the most troublesome problem for him. Thorin Oakenshield once had a malicious guess: could it be that Gandalf knew to deceive himself on purpose? However, when he touched the key that belonged to the hidden cave in the Lonely Mountain, Thorin Oakenshield quickly dismissed this idea. Aware of Thorin Oakenshield's silence, Gandalf struck while the iron was hot, and continued. Thorin, we have no food now, no horses, we have nothing, Bomber Boffer is still wounded, and there are orcs out there. If we don't come here, where can we go? If we want to be successful, we need to use some strategy. Respect, and charm. You don't have to do anything else, just let me communicate. Hear Gandalf's words. Thorin Oakenshield was silent for a long time, and finally said two words helplessly, okay. Thorin Oakenshield finally compromised. Although one people in his heart are unwilling to compromise. But Gandalf was right. The expedition had previously lost the makeshift camp. At this time, there was no food, no horses, and there were still a large number of orcs outside. Bomber Boffer was injured, and the team needed a good rest. And most importantly, the map's secrets need to be unraveled. Thorin Oakenshield couldn't think of any other way besides accepting Gandalf's method. Like Gandalf just said, sometimes strategy is needed. The stakes are high on this adventure, and nothing can be lost, not even by asking for the help of the enemy elves. As long as it can be successful, it is worth it. After Thorin Oakenshield strengthened his inner thoughts. Then look at the beautiful river valley that countless people have marveled at in the distance. It feels really pleasing to the eye. The expedition continued on its way. Or Gandalf leading the team. Morgan was right behind Gandalf. Bilbo followed Morgan. For Bilbo. In the entire expedition team, apart from having a better relationship with Gandalf, there is the human Morgan. Although a group of dwarves treated him quite normally, Bilbo could clearly feel the ridicule and sarcasm in their words from time to time. Bilbo also knew that it was Gandalf's fault that the dwarves had agreed to let him join their ranks. The protection along the way is also because of Gandalf. All was clear in Bilbo's mind. Although being looked down upon by dwarves, he will be very angry. But Bilbo wanted to prove himself more. As Gandalf said in his Bag End at Hobbiton. He wanted to prove that he was no worse than his grandfather and grandfather, and he also wanted to prove to Gandalf, who was optimistic about himself and believed in him, that his vision was correct. So, Bilbo, an adventurous newcomer who will be frightened by wild boars from the start. When the expedition team was overtaken by half-orcs in the forest, he had already dared to take up the short sword and fight with half-orcs. This is a big improvement. It was just that the situation was critical and no one noticed. In the expedition team. Besides Gandalf, Bilbo wants to befriend Morgan most, of course. For the reasons Gandalf had commanded. There are also reasons for Morgan's character. Because he had never seen a trace of contempt, ridicule, or mocking tone and expression in Morgan's mouth and eyes. So Bilbo was willing to approach Morgan. Morgan, listen to what you just said, have you been here before? Bilbo quickened his pace to keep pace with Morgan, asking casually. Chapter 37. The Elf Lord. Rivendell is built on a hill. One side is close to the majestic mountain peak. Surrounded on three sides by wide rivers rushing all year round. Only a huge arch bridge connects the two ends of the valley. The members of the expedition team were walking on this huge arch bridge at this time. This is Rivendell. I've heard of it many times before. I didn't expect that I would be able to go to Rivendell one day. Although it is the residence of elves, it is really beautiful here, just like a fairy tale. Can you shut up? The elves are our enemies. You just need to shut up. Didn't hear Gandalf say, this is our strategy, do you understand the strategy? Shut up all of you, it's not good to be heard by those elves. If you hear it, you will hear it, I will be afraid of those elves who are like girls. Shut up all of you, you are all here, we are guests now, and Bomber Boffer also needs treatment from the elves, so please stop talking for a while, don't embarrass us dwarves. Of course I won't embarrass the dwarves. The dwarves, as always, like to chatter and quarrel. In the past, Morgan also liked to insert a few words when the dwarves quarreled and argued, so as to comfort the boredom of the journey. Listening to the dwarves arguing was one of the few joys that Thorin Oakenshield, Gandalf, and the others enjoyed during the boring journey. But now, Morgan had no intention of listening to the dwarves talking nonsense. He is now engrossed in admiring the picturesque scenery of Rivendell. For Morgan, he can enjoy the scenery that truly belongs to the city of elves Rivendell with his own eyes. Instead of being in front of a movie screen, looking at the illusory scenery that can only be made with green cloth special effects. What a blessing! Of course, Morgan can come to this world with such golden thighs as the transmigrator system. It is his unparalleled luck. At this time, like Morgan is not the only one who fully appreciates the scenery of Rivendell. Like Bilbo, like Balin the Whitebeard dwarf, like Dwellin the dwarf, even Thorin Oakenshield. You know it's not easy to come to Rivendell once. Especially for dwarves. Elves are their enemies. God knows if there will be such an opportunity in the future. Those who are smart naturally have to take the time to appreciate it, which is the capital for bragging when drinking in the future. And when I get old and tell my grandson about my adventures when I was young, there are stories to tell. Walk slowly along the nearly -meter-long giant arch bridge. It didn't take long for a group of people to walk past the watchful eyes of two huge elf warrior guard statues at the head of the bridge. Really walked into the wide square under the mountain that belonged to Rivendell. Didn't make people wait long. Soon, several elves appeared on the stone ladder in front of them. The leading elf is slender and handsome, wearing gorgeous and exquisite robes. Just showing up can give other people a gentlemanly and refined atmosphere. Morgan looked at each other's ears for the first time, and they were indeed pointed and slender, unlike the dwarf hobbits he had seen now. What if ears like that were on dwarves or hobbits? This idea suddenly popped up in my mind. Morgan fantasizes, with pointy ears, short stature, and ugly features. A fantasy creature immediately appeared in Morgan's mind, goblins. Shaking his head, he tried hard to get the bad picture out of his mind. Morgan focused his eyes on the elves who were walking towards him again. I have to sigh, it is normal for the elves' ears to grow like this. Headed by an elf handsome gentleman. The other elves are also similar, with good looks and figures. In the previous life, no matter whether they were drawn to be models or male models in the White Horse Club, they would all be the targets of competition. Just seeing these few, Morgan felt that the elves were really different. Come out casually, no, a few are handsome. But the opponent is handsome, but it always feels like something is missing. It's a bit lackluster. Yes, it's just missing the features. These elves look a bit like they came out of an assembly line. Far inferior to myself. He secretly recalled his own appearance. Many interesting ideas suddenly popped up in Morgan's mind. In her previous life, Morgan looked ugly and fierce. When I see handsome guys, I sometimes think that no matter how handsome they are not enough to punch. Now dressed as a handsome guy. When I saw handsome guys again, what I wanted was not to beat them up, but to compare myself secretly. Shaking his head vigorously, Morgan cursed secretly and stopped thinking about it. The leading elf obviously knew Gandalf and greeted him from a distance. Gandalf also greeted him with a smile on his face. The two talked in Elvish. Morgan listened carefully and found that he could understand. Only then did he understand what the first built-in ability universal language in the ability column of the body data panel meant. Gandalf chatted with the elf named Linda and did not shy away from everyone. It's just that the two of them are speaking Elvish. The elf named Linda looked at the dwarves not far away from time to time during the chat. Make suspicious dwarves tense. Morgan knew the general content of those two chats, but he would certainly not tell others. Suddenly, there was a loud horn sound from the other side of the valley. The group of people in the square immediately turned their heads. I saw a large group of fully armed elf cavalry in silver armor rushing towards this side from the opposite bank of the giant arch bridge. Seeing this scene, Thorin Oakenshield felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. He drew out his dagger, stood in front of the team and shouted, "Hurry up, gather closer." The dwarves took out their weapons one after another and quickly made a defensive posture. At this time, the heavily armed elf cavalry finally rushed into the wide square. A large number of cavalry moved back and forth around the dwarf team. The dwarves stared at the elves, but they didn't dare to act rashly. At this time, a tall, handsome and majestic middle-aged elf, wearing a golden armor and a golden corolla, rode a tall white horse into the square. Gandalf. The middle-aged elf greeted Gandalf from afar. Lord Elon. Gandalf bowed slightly. The middle-aged elf dismounted, stepped forward, smiled and hugged Gandalf. Morgan could guess that the handsome and majestic middle-aged elf in front of him should be the Elf Lord of Rivendell. Take Rivendell's status in the entire Middle-earth world. And the Elf Lord's passion for Gandalf. Morgan could see that the relationship between these two men was indeed extraordinary. Where did you go? Patting each other on the shoulders, Gandalf looked at King Elon and smiled. We've just hunted a group of orcs from the south, and killed quite a few around the secret pass. It's strange that orcs are so close to our borders. I wondered if there was something, or someone, that brought them here. King Elon said as he handed the sword in his hand to the elf beside him, then turned to look at the expedition team and said. Chapter 38. The reason. Seeing that Gandalf has such a close relationship with that King Elon, the dwarves who were in a tense atmosphere were slightly relieved. But looking at the elven cavalry still surrounding them, the dwarves would not relax. Bilbo was still protected in the center by the dwarves. Morgan stood beside Gandalf looking calm. Maybe it's because of us. Hearing what King Elon said, Gandalf smiled and said. King Elon didn't speak, waved his hand to dismiss the elf cavalry, and said a few words to the elf named Linda behind him. Only then did they look at the expedition team. King Elon's eyes first fell on Morgan standing beside Gandalf. In the case that the vast majority of the expedition team are dwarves, the tall, handsome human Morgan is definitely a conspicuous presence. Well, second only to Gandalf the wizard. Not only because Gandalf is taller than Morgan. More because of Gandalf's traditional wizard image. In Middle-earth, very few people have actually seen a wizard. The image of a wizard basically belongs to the legendary existence in the eyes of most people. King Elon looked at Morgan with a smile and said, "This is." Gandalf was about to introduce him, but saw Morgan stepping forward when King Elon spoke, bowed slightly, saluted the Elf Lord who was well known throughout Middle-earth, and said, "I'm Morgan. It's an honor to meet you, Lord Elon." Gandalf looked at Morgan's actions with a smile on his face, but thoughtful in his heart. In fact, he himself knew that it was a bit risky to bring the expedition team to Rivendell for help. Because the final goal of the expedition is to steal the Arcane Gem, which symbolizes the highest authority of the dwarves, from the underground treasure house of the Lonely Mountain occupied by the dragon Smaug. With the Gem of Akon, Thorin Oakenshield could call for reinforcements from other dwarves to help him deal with the dragon Smaug in order to take back the Lonely Mountain. There is no doubting the evil and power of the dragon Smaug. More than 60 years ago, he was able to destroy the then powerful Yamashita kingdom by himself. He monopolizes the mountain-like wealth of the kingdom under the mountain for 60 years. During this process, no other force dared to play against Smaug. This is the terrifying power of the dragon Smaug. Such an evil and terrifying powerful existence has occupied the Lonely Mountain for 60 years. But, it's also been quiet for 60 years. This is what the major forces in China are very happy to see. No one knows exactly how much wealth Erebor, known as the capital of wealth in the Yamashita kingdom more than 60 years ago, possessed. But everyone knows that the kingdom under the mountain occupied by the Turin dwarves is extremely rich. At that time, after the kingdom under the mountain was captured by the dragon, it was rumored all over the world that the kingdom under the mountain was destroyed because they possessed too much wealth, which attracted the coveting of the dragon Smaug. That's the truth. None of the major powers in the Middle-earth world is not jealous of the huge wealth of the kingdom under the mountain. But no one dared to move, no one could do anything. This is actually the best way, because it is occupied by the dragon Smaug, and no one can get it. Everyone is balanced. At the same time, because of the vast wealth, the dragon Smaug can also stay quietly under the Lonely Mountain, and will not run around and cause harm. And stay for 60 years. That's what all powers want to see, and expect Smaug to die at the Lonely Mountain's riches at best. Such is the case. Gandalf led an expedition team of dwarves to go to the Lonely Mountain to deal with the dragon Smaug, and wanted to take back the kingdom under the mountain. Once such a risky move is known to the major forces that protect the stability of Middle-earth, the reaction can be imagined. This was also the reason why Thorin Oakenshield strongly opposed coming to Rivendell. Of course, the hatred between the dwarves and the elves is equally important. The Turin dwarves represented by Thorin Oakenshield want to take back the Lonely Mountain. There is hatred and reason, which is reasonable. The major forces also have reasons for the peace and stability of China. As for Gandalf himself, he sensed the imminent move of the dark forces, and this was the motivation for Thorin Oakenshield and his party to take back the Lonely Mountain. Because once the dark forces make a comeback again, it is very likely that they will unite with the dragon Smaug. With Smaug's evil power, it will be too late by then. Gandalf came to Middle-earth as the demigod Maya to maintain peace. This is his mission. This is why even if he knows that the expedition team may be prevented from coming to Rivendell. But he still came, that is, because of his friendly relationship with King Elon. There is also a reason why he wants to try to persuade other people once he is blocked. Because he knew that it was difficult to hide this matter from those powerful beings. As for whether there was a reason for coming to Rivendell to unlock the map of the Lonely Mountain in order to convince Thorin Oakenshield, only Gandalf himself knows. Welcome to Rivendell. Morgan, I hope you can have fun in Rivendell next time. King Elon looked at Morgan and smiled. Regardless of his status as Lord Rivendell, Eldrin Elf King is impeccable in personal cultivation. In the story of Morgan's memory, he was deeply impressed by the Elf Lord who controls the most powerful force in the entire Middle-earth world. Now came Rivendell. No matter in identity, strength, or status, Morgan needs to show due respect to the Elf King. I will. Rivendell is the most desirable place in Middle-earth. Morgan smiled and offered a compliment. Although it is true. Had a brief chat with Morgan. King Elon's eyes turned to the dwarves who were still gathered together. At this moment, Thorin Oakenshield came out. Welcome, Thorin, son of Thorn. King Elon looked at Thorin Oakenshield and said in a deep voice. I don't think we've met. Thorin's tone was calm, but the meaning in his words was somewhat thorny. You look a lot like your grandfather. I met your grandfather's soul when he ruled the kingdom below the mountain. As if he didn't care about Thorin's barbed words, King Elon continued to speak. Really, he never mentioned you. Thorin continued, still stinging. King Elon's face was calm, and he didn't seem to be angry at Thorin Oakenshield's unfriendly attitude. But when King Elon finished sizing Thorin Oakenshield, and then saw a group of very vigilant dwarves behind him, he suddenly looked at Thorin Oakenshield and said in Elven language, You are as stubborn as your grandfather's soul, no matter what, whether it's character or speech, it's always so disgusting. King Elon spoke quickly. But the expressionless look and the Elven language that burst out of his mouth. Immediately, all the dwarves noticed something was wrong. The dwarves were not stupid. They seemed to have sensed that the elf lord in front of them had said something bad to Thorin. The dwarf Groin immediately became angry. What is he talking about? Is he insulting us? Groin spoke angrily, which immediately aroused the sympathy of the other dwarves. The dwarves immediately booed angrily. Seeing that the situation was not good, Gandalf, who was standing aside, immediately stepped forward, looked at the group of dwarves and said quickly, No, King Elon means that he wants to invite you to dinner. After Gandalf's voice fell, the dwarves immediately became quiet. You look at me and I look at you, after whispering for a while. In the end, Ji Luyan said with some embarrassment, If that's the case, then lead the way. Chapter 39. Female Elves. The dwarves were easily bought by Gandalf when King Elon invited you to dinner. Follow the expedition team on the way to Rivendell Castle. Morgan was standing beside Gandalf trying to hold back his laughter. Gandalf, who was talking to King Elon, suddenly turned his head, looked at Morgan suspiciously and asked in a low voice, Can you understand Elvish? Morgan's spirit was shaken, and his smile disappeared instantly. He asked Gandalf with his usual expression, Elvish language. What do you mean? Of course I don't know Elvish. Why do you ask that? Seeing that Morgan, who looked puzzled, didn't look like a fake, Gandalf smiled and shook his head and said nothing. Immediately turned his head and continued talking with King Elon. A group of people followed King Gandalf Elon straight to the depths of Rivendell. Along the way, gardens, attics, gazebos, fountains, flowers, buildings full of strong fantasy style, all kinds of exquisite decorations really opened Morgan's eyes. King Elon chatted happily with Gandalf. Morgan consciously stepped back a few positions and followed behind. At this time, Bilbo, who was originally standing with the dwarf, walked up quickly and walked with Morgan, chatting while walking. Thorin Oakenshield led a group of dwarves at the end. The performance of a group of dwarves was a bit embarrassing. They glanced and watched one by one, and then gathered together to mutter secretly. It's a muttering, but it's actually quite loud. Morgan turned his head and glanced at the group of dwarves behind him, and then at Bilbo who was walking beside him. He knew why Bilbo didn't want to go with the dwarves anymore. So he consciously quickened his pace, and quickly distanced himself from the dwarves behind him. Seeing this, Bilbo also quickened his pace immediately, and caught up with Morgan again. Follow King Elon and Gandalf along the way. The male elves Morgan met were all tall and handsome, but it seemed that due to the excessive vegetarian diet, most of them were very thin, and none of them were fat. Although the male elves are all handsome, they are all a bit feminine, a bit neutral and handsome. This appearance made Morgan immediately think of the male supermodel seen on the catwalk in his previous life. The looks of the female elves did not disappoint Morgan. They all had exquisite looks, fair skin, and tall stature. Morgan, who saw it for the first time with an eye-opening look, suddenly wondered if he was at the scene of a supermodel catwalk. Although these female elves don't belong to the type with protruding fronts and backs, exploding bodies, hot hearts at first sight, and seductive impulsiveness. But this kind of tall, well-proportioned, delicate-looking, fair-faced female elf with a hint of weakness is really amazing. It's not like Morgan hasn't seen a beautiful woman before. In his previous life, he was not short of money. Every time he won a very dangerous underground boxing match, he would find several high-end young models to indulge for a whole night. As for the race, he found yellow skin and white skin the most, and he even tried black ones. Morgan has nothing special in this regard, as long as his body and appearance meet his aesthetic standards, he has no restrictions. However, this was indeed the first time he had seen a female elf with a high-level face like Rivendell's in his previous life. He felt that from now on, his vision of women might be elevated invisibly. But the standard for a person to achieve something. The first important factor is self-discipline. The same goes for Morgan, who indulged himself after a boxing bout. The next step is to train, and train. Coming to this world now, I don't have to train like crazy in my previous life. But the self-discipline formed by habit was brought over by him. This is also the reason why he trained by himself whenever he was free during the previous journey. But as long as you are human, you will have desires. Only with a degree of relaxation in life can we maintain the best state and combat effectiveness. After 2 months of hard-working adventures like an ascetic monk, Morgan would be lying if he said that he would not be tempted by these charming female elves. Morgan liked these elves, but he wasn't the unseen dwarf bumpkin behind him. Elves are a race that attaches great importance to etiquette. If you want to gain their favor, at least you can't be too rude in terms of politeness. Rivendell has very few foreign guests. This time Gandalf arrived with Morgan Thorin and other expedition team, which attracted the attention of almost all the elves he met on the road. Follow Gandalf and King Elon. Morgan and all the female elves who met and cast their eyes nodded with very gentlemanly smiles. As for the gazes of the male elves, he ignored them all. The elves have a long lifespan. Living in a fairy tale place like Rivendell, life is rich and leisurely. But like every other creature, as long as you have too much free time, you will feel bored and boring. The combination of wizard, dwarf, hobbit, and human is not common. Many elves encountered on the road stopped to watch, even some elves who were busy with their hands. But King Elon said nothing, but talked to Gandalf. This made Morgan know that the living conditions of these elves in Rivendell should be very easy. The elves stopped and watched. A group of dwarves seemed to be more enthusiastic. The female elves are too thin. Yes, the cheekbones are too high, and there is not enough hair on the face, the skin is too smooth. No beard yet. Tall and thin, without any flesh, we dwarves are better. Hey, this is not bad. The dwarf Kili looked at the tall figure with long hair in front of him and said suddenly. Kili, what kind of eyes do you have? That's not an elf girl. Fei Li spoke quickly, and the voice fell. The figure in front suddenly turned around, it was a male elf. Ha ha! Ha 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 ha! At this moment, the dwarves immediately burst into laughter. Make everyone around you stare at him. My goodness! Looking at the group of dwarves who were noisy everywhere behind him, rude and vulgar dwarves who didn't know what politeness was, Bilbo covered his face and wished he didn't know each other at all. Hey, take it easy Bilbo. Sensing the strangeness of Bilbo beside him, Morgan patted Bilbo on the shoulder and said with a smile, it's not the first day you know them. I know, but, we are guests now, you know. This is so rude. Bilbo gestured, a little angry and a little helpless. Looking at Bilbo's somewhat exaggerated angry look. It was only then that Morgan remembered that even though the house was suddenly emptied by dwarves more than a month ago, he tried his best to maintain his demeanor. The little man next to him is indeed a hobbit with good manners, good personality, and strong self-esteem. Patting Bilbo on the shoulder, Morgan said nothing more. At this moment, 2 beautiful elf girls walked by the team together. Morgan turned his head, and saw the beautiful elf girl with a golden shawl and long hair staring at him intently. Morgan smiled and looked at the beautiful elf girl. Until the other party saw his face blushing and turned around in defeat. The moment you walk into the garden with Gandalf and King Elon. Morgan murmured, I like it here. Chapter 40. Banquet. The group followed King Elon and Gandalf through gazebos, fountains, gardens, and attics. Finally arrived in an open-air garden. Walking into the garden, the first thing everyone saw was a huge tree. The big trees are lush and luxuriant, and the large and small branches are intertwined, covering the entire garden like a canopy. Under the big tree, all kinds of elf delicacies have already been placed on the two exquisite long dining tables. Beside the long table, there are several beautiful elf girls, playing the flute and playing the accordion. They look very stylish. Bilbo and the dwarves were invited to sit at a nearby table. Morgan was pulled by Gandalf to sit at the main table with King Elon and Thorin Oakenshield. The weather in Rivendell today is fine. It was mid-afternoon. The golden autumn warm sun not only gives the whole Rivendell a beautiful golden yellow, but also makes people feel particularly comfortable and warm when it shines on people. The open-air garden is built on the heights of Rivendell, with a good location and an extremely wide view. Standing in the garden, you can almost see the entire scenery of Rivendell at a glance. The environment is beautiful, the sun is comfortable, the music is soft, and there are beautiful elf girls on the side. Sure enough, the powerful can get the best enjoyment anywhere. Morgan sighed in his heart, and looked away from the golden sea of clouds in the distance. At this time, the elf servants had already served the last meal. Looking at the table full of food in front of him, Morgan smiled. The elves are all vegetarians, and most of the food on the table is a variety of vegetable salads, fruits of various colors, jams, fruit wine, and sweet pastries of various colors. Although they are basically vegetarian, the variety is very rich, and every fruit looks fresh and green, and it looks very high-end. The dwarves are going to be in trouble. Morgan was secretly happy, and immediately turned his head to look over. Sure enough, a group of dwarves were staring at the colorful food table in front of them, frowning. Originally thought that the elf lord of Rivendell, such a big man, invited them to dinner. He must be full of all kinds of big fish and meat, all kinds of delicacies and wine. I didn't expect to eat these fruits and vegetables. This thing is usually used by them to feed pigs and sheep, so how can they be full? Know that dwarves would rather eat the driest and toughest jerky than a bite of vegetables. To use a saying they often say, without meat, the mouth will fade like a bird. Morgan has been with a group of dwarves for more than a month, and has learned a lot about the dwarves. The reason why dwarves cannot live without meat is closely related to their lifestyle. Because of their race, dwarves are the best miners. They are good at mining and love mining. The dwarves in Middle-earth basically live in the underground mines they dug. If there is no special reason, most ordinary dwarves are likely to live underground and never come out of the ground. The daily work of ordinary dwarves is basically knocking in the mines and mines. Mining is a very labor-intensive labor. If you don't eat meat, you won't have the strength. This is also the reason why dwarves love each other. Elves, on the other hand, have a lifespan far exceeding that of ordinary races. They can have the ability to communicate with vegetation naturally after being trained after birth. They also have an excellent body and appearance that many races envy. All of which make the race of elves seem particularly blessed. The elves are close to nature, and they regard all kinds of flowers, plants, trees, and animals in the forest as friends. This is also the reason why elves can communicate with vegetation and nature. Even though everything looks perfect. But in fact, they also have a very fatal weakness, that is, their chances of procreating offspring are much more difficult than other races. Once war broke out, the elves recovered more slowly than any other race in Middle-earth. However, in the entire multiverse, the long-lived species almost all face similar problems, and it is not unique to the elves. Back to topic. Even though the dwarves looked at the green food on the table, they couldn't hide their disgust. But I also know that this is in the territory of elves. The elves eat and drink, although the dwarves don't care about these things at all. But the minimum politeness and upbringing is still necessary. Although the dwarves murmured disgust, they did not embarrass everyone by saying it out loud. Morgan turned his head, picked up a thumb-sized, grape-like fruit from the dinner plate in front of him, and threw it into his mouth. When his teeth were crushed hard, the full pulp and sweet juice immediately filled the entire mouth, making people feel very happy. The sweetness in the mouth immediately becomes pleasant. Really not bad. Morgan's eyes brightened slightly, and he looked forward to the various brightly colored fruits on the table in front of him. After more than a month of hard-working and adventurous career, today I can finally have a good meal. Morgan began to eat a lot. As the Lord of Rivendell, King Elon had a big business, and he didn't have the polite idea of saving food for the other party. The others were similar, that is, the dwarves on the side table, who disliked it or disliked it, could stuff anything when they were hungry. It's legendary enough. He was attacked by orc scouts in the middle of the night last night, and ran wildly for most of the night. The next morning, shortly after resting, I encountered a giant troll stealing a horse. After the expedition team had worked hard to deal with the 3 trolls, they copied the opponent's lair. In the end, he was too late to be happy, and was chased up by the orcs again. And this time the half-orcs are coming fiercely and on a huge scale. Not counting the loss of all the parcels of dry food and a dozen or so valuable ponies left in the temporary camp. In the end, he was almost overtaken by a large army of orcs. If it weren't for Gandalf leading everyone through the secret passage to Rivendell, Morgan couldn't imagine what would happen to the expedition now. When the stomach began to feel a little full, everyone slowed down their eating speed, and they began to chat. Gandalf and King Elon are good friends and talk the most. At this time, the two were chatting, and Gandalf suddenly took out the single-edged longsword hanging on his waist and handed it to King Elon for him to show. King Elon took the longsword, looked at it for a while, pulled out the longsword, stared at the inscription under the hilt and said slowly, "This is the Beast Bite sword. It is famous for killing half-orcs, forged by Western High Elves made." King Elon slowly revealed the message of the elf sword that Gandalf handed over. Morgan consciously picked up the saber on his body and handed it over. "This is Granary." King Elon drew out his long sword with a cold light, looked at the inscription on the sword and spoke solemnly. "This is the sword of King Gondolin. It's called the enemy fencing sword, and it became famous in the first era of war with goblins. Forged by my Western High Elf clan." King Elon handed back the long sword in his hand to Morgan, and said, "This is a real sword, I hope it can help you." Chapter 41. Counting the Harvest. King Elon handed back the sword to Morgan. Thorin Oakenshield just in time handed over the short sword Morgan had thrown to him in the cave of the 3 trolls. King Elon took the dagger, looked at it for a while, and then pulled out the dagger to observe the inscription cast on the blade. There are no inscriptions on ordinary weapons. Only when a real sword is forged, will the blacksmith cast inscriptions on it for transmission. These cast inscriptions basically record the information of this weapon. For example, the time and place of weapon forging, and some even have the name of the blacksmith on them. Of course, only forging masters are eligible to leave their names on the sword. There are 2 ways for a sword to become famous. The first one is because of the master who holds the sword has made meritorious service and great reputation in the war, which can make the sword he holds famous. The second is because of birth, from the hands of a well-known forging master, which can make a sword have a certain reputation from the moment it comes out of the furnace. However, most of the well-known swords that have been handed down are famous for the first reason. Because from ancient times to the present, there are too few existences that can reach the level of a master blacksmith, and there are even fewer swords forged by a master blacksmith. This is also the reason Morgan, Gandalf, and Thorin Oakenshield's swords are all famous because of the first type of record. King Elon's erudition is as much admired by Gandalf. In just a short period of time, the 3 long swords of unknown origin can be clearly explained like a few treasures. Apparently, Thorin Oakenshield, who was at the side, was stunned. "May it serve you well." When King Elon smiled and handed back the dagger that had been appraised to Thorin Oakenshield. Looking at the dwarf king who took the short sword politely with both hands, Morgan could clearly see that Thorin Oakenshield had a lot of respect for King Elon. The 2 dining tables in the open-air garden are not far apart. The sound of King Elon appreciating the long sword at Morgan's table naturally spread to the other table. Bilbo listened to King Elon's words, and could not help taking out the very short sword that Gandalf had handed him when he came out of the troll's cave at last. Balin, the white-bearded dwarf, was sitting beside him, watching Bilbo's movements and smiling. "Don't worry about that, Bilbo. The sword is named for its great achievements in war, and yours." Balin shook his head with a smile. "You mean my sword has never been used in battle?" Bilbo asked, a little annoyed. "I'm not sure if the thing in your hand is a sword, to be honest, it looks more like a letter opener." "Letter opener?" Bilbo froze at Balin's words. "How is that possible? A letter opener won't glow when a half-orc approaches." Bilbo wanted to refute Balin, but he didn't say anything. At the main table, King Elon introduced the 3 elven swords to the 3, and naturally asked about the source. "How did you get these?" King Elon asked in surprise. "We got it in the troll storage cellar on Eastern Avenue, and then we were attacked by orcs." Gandalf took a sip of the fruit wine and spoke. For his friend King Elon, Gandalf didn't want to hide too much, because he wanted to unlock the secrets of the map, and this expedition couldn't hide it from him. Although Gandalf didn't want to hide it. "What are you doing on Eastern Avenue?" King Elon continued to ask. Although he was a little surprised that Gandalf would be with a group of dwarves, he didn't know the purpose of the group for the time being. But as soon as King Elon finished speaking, Thorin Oakenshield's complexion changed slightly, and he immediately said, "I'm full, excuse me first." Thorin Oakenshield got up and left after speaking. Only Morgan, King Elrond, and Gandalf were left at the main table. Didn't care about Thorin Oakenshield's departure. However, King Elon clearly saw the opponent's reaction. There was no further question that would trouble Gandalf. King Elon took a sip of the fruit wine from the glass in front of him and said with a smile, 13 dwarves, a hobbit, Morgan, and you are such a strange travelling companion, Gandalf. They are all descendants of the Turin dwarves. They are all excellent, noble, upright, polite, and well-educated." Gandalf picked up a few crystal-clear red fruits and put them into his mouth with a smile. Morgan picked up the fruit wine in the glass in front of him and took a sip, then turned his head to look at the table beside him, and saw Oli the dwarf picked up a silver wine glass, looked left and right, and quickly stuffed it into his arms. This scene, combined with Gandalf's words, almost made Morgan spit out. Cough cough. Morgan coughed a few times before recovering. Looking up at King Elon and Gandalf, they found that they didn't seem to notice anything strange next door, and continued to chat. At this moment, there was a sudden noise from the next table. Morgan turned his head and saw the excellent, noble, upright, polite, and well-educated dwarves that Gandalf had said just now. At this moment there was chaos around their table, and the dwarves began to sing, tapping their knives and forks on the plates and cutlery. Just singing and singing, several dwarves got up and stood on the exquisite long table, and began to dance. Turning the exquisite and luxurious banquet held by the elves into an open-air barbecue party, only the dwarves can do it. Apart from being a little surprised at the beginning, Morgan didn't think it was too strange. Anyway, as long as these dwarves are happy to eat and drink, they like to do this kind of thing with enthusiasm, and he has long been used to it. Like in Bilbo's Bag End more than a month ago, in temporary camps in the wild, this is what the dwarves do. At this banquet, Morgan enjoyed eating fruit. In such a world, although fruit is not a rare item, it is definitely a high-consumption item. At a price comparable to that of meat, ordinary civilians would only choose meat instead of fruits that would be digested in a blink of an eye. Ordinary fruits are expensive, not to mention the exotic fruits produced in Rivendell, the capital of elves, which was brought out by King Elon to entertain guests. The dwarves sang and danced at the banquet, although it was a bit impolite. But considering that this is a characteristic of the dwarves, King Elon naturally doesn't care about anything because he is well informed. When the banquet is over, it was almost evening. It was just getting dark. The whole Rivendell lights up. One after another the lights came on. Just in the evening, the entire Rivendell was illuminated by lights like daytime. Under the arrangement of the elves, Morgan and the expedition team were taken to an attic by the elves. Perhaps it was due to the relationship with Gandalf, or maybe it was a good performance that was appreciated by King Elon. The elves arranged a single room for Morgan. 14 dwarves and Bilbo were arranged in 3 rooms. Among them, Thorin Oakenshield has 1 room alone, and the other 13 people have 2 rooms. Send away the elf maid. Morgan closed the door and looked at the tub full of hot water in the spacious room. Morgan felt that King Elon's arrangement was really appropriate. Lying naked in the steaming tub, Morgan moaned. He closed his eyes and lay down in the tub for a while. Morgan opened his eyes, his thoughts moved slightly. Brush brush. A series of virtual data began to jump and flicker out of thin air and appeared in front of my eyes. Chapter 42. The Secret of Soul Power. Transmigrator, Morgan. Race, Human. Biology level, Tier Dash. Soul Power, 7. Attributes, Strength LV1, Constitution LV1+, Dexterity LV2+, Spirit+. Ability, Common Language, Muay Thai LV2, White Crow Sword LV2, Bow and Archery LV3. Talent, Intimacy, Special Skill. Current World Exploration Progress, 0.46%. 7 points of Soul Power. Why is there only 7 points of soul power in total? Seeing the pale white light curtain flickering in front of him, Morgan's eyes widened when he saw the data in the column of soul power clearly. After repeatedly confirming that he was not dazzled, Morgan quickly frowned. Although the last time it was strengthened, it was only this morning. But what Morgan experienced this whole day was more exciting and thrilling than any day in the 2 months since he came to this world. First encountered 3 giant trolls early in the morning. After the expedition team worked hard to kill them, they took the opportunity to copy the troll cave. I got a high elf sword and a small bag full of gems of various colors. In this battle, although the team is fighting together, but killing the 3 trolls is basically done by himself, and he should be the one who contributed the most in the expedition team. Then he was overtaken by orcs while heading to the temporary camp. In this battle, he killed at least 5 orcs and wargs together. Then when he was led by Gandalf to the vast stone forest. When they were caught up by the orc army, they and Kili drew their bows to cover. Although this time was not a battle in a certain sense, he still killed an orc and a warg. The results of the 3 battles are added together, even if the ogre is not counted first. Even if there are half orcs and wargs together, there are 7 or 8. One counts a little soul power, which is 7 or 8 points of soul power. Coupled with the trolls, the size and strength of the 3 trolls determine that the combat effectiveness of each giant troll far exceeds that of the half-orcs. Facts have also proved this. No matter how low the ogre's calculation is, a little soul power is not too much. Together with the half-orc warg, it also has about 10 points of soul power. But now the data shows that there are only 7 soul powers in total. He was attacked by half-orcs last night, and he only killed about 6 or 7 half-orcs, and got 6 points of soul power last night. Today's record is significantly more than last night, and the soul power is only a little more than yesterday. This is too little, isn't this frankly a mentality? However, the system on Morgan is not an intelligent cute girl, and it cannot answer humanely like other systems and even sleep with her. His system doesn't even have an explanation, everything can only be explored by himself. Grumbling. Depressed, Morgan had to sink his head into the steaming hot water to soak. Hold back for a while. Morgan poked his head out and wiped the water stains on his face. Put depression aside. Only then did he look back at the virtual panel in front of him like a movie screen. Combined with the previous guess about soul power, plus the comparison of last night's record and today's record, Morgan felt that he had a preliminary understanding of the information about the acquisition of soul power in his system. That is, the source of soul power, besides being obtained by killing other creatures, has not found a second way to obtain it. The conditions for obtaining soul power are also very strict. It is not possible to obtain soul power by killing any creature. Only by killing creatures whose comprehensive strength exceeds or is comparable to the host's strength can one obtain soul power. This can be seen from the fact that Morgan came to this world for a month and killed countless creatures, big and small, but only gained the first bit of soul power by killing the giant bear with difficulty. Also, the difficulty of obtaining soul power will change as Morgan's strength improves. For example, Morgan could gain a little soul power by killing a half-orc last night. But today, he has to kill 2 or 3 half-orcs to gain a little soul power. Why? Because Morgan's strength before strengthening last night is obviously different from Morgan's strength after strengthening this morning. The system will change according to Morgan's own strength, thereby changing the corresponding difficulty of obtaining soul power. This is what Morgan just obtained after comparative analysis. Otherwise, he couldn't think of why the soul power gained from killing the same number of orcs with a difference of less than a day was so different. Of course, it is also possible that the system made a mistake, or simply cheated the system. But Morgan knew that was impossible. Call. He let out a long breath. Morgan is no longer entangled, and it is not worthwhile to be angry with the system. His eyes returned to the virtual panel. Morgan began to think about the next strengthening. Although the harvest of soul power at 7 o'clock is not as good as last night, considering that it is less than a day away from last night, it is already a lot. Morgan's gaze first rested on the ability bar. The universal language cannot be strengthened without further reading. Muay Thai LV2 was brought over from the previous life, it is not very useful now, and there is no need to strengthen it for the time being. White Crow Swordsmanship LV2 has just been strengthened to LV2 in the morning. Although Morgan is speeding up his practice and mastering, the time is too short and his proficiency is not enough. He can wait for the strengthening. Bow and Archery LV3 was also just upgraded to LV3 in the morning, and Morgan's main strength now lies. Although archery at LV3 level is more difficult to master, Morgan has a deep enough understanding of archery at LV2. Compared to LV2's White Crow swordsmanship, he is sure that he can master LV3's bow and archery faster. The proficiency is not enough, and the bow and archery of LV3 has temporarily reached a critical point, and the next strengthening requires 3 points of soul power. Therefore, the strengthening of bow and archery can also go to the back row first. The ability does not need to be strengthened for the time being. Morgan's gaze immediately moved to the 4 attribute bars representing his body. Of the 4 major attributes, 3 attributes were strengthened in the morning, but the spirit was not strengthened. Morgan frowned and recalled the plot in memory, and found that the next plot in the memory plot that had a battle occurred seemed to be in the underground Goblin Kingdom. And it was this time in the mine at the bottom of the underground kingdom that Bilbo got the Supreme Lord of the Rings from the cunning, evil, and poor grunt monster. Is it so close already? Morgan suddenly realized that he had been thinking about training and exploring the system during this period, and he was very tired and fulfilled every day. Coupled with the 2 consecutive days of fighting and fleeing for his life, he didn't have much time to think about it. Only then did I realize that I was very close to the Lord of the Rings that stirred up the situation in Middle-earth. In order to obtain the Lord of the Rings, one condition must first be met. That is the spirit, that is, the willpower must be strong enough. Otherwise, if you get the Lord of the Rings, you will be degenerate and die. Looking at the whole world of Middle-earth, the plots of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings series of movies spanned more than 60 years. Except for Bilbo, who is optimistic and kind by nature, who can resist the evil temptation of the Lord of the Rings, even Gandalf cannot resist the temptation of the Lord of the Rings. Morgan didn't think he had Bilbo's heart. Thinking of this, Morgan immediately looked at the spiritual attribute and strengthened it without hesitation. This strengthening consumes 1 soul power, whether to strengthen it. Spirit LV1. Spirit LV2. Spirit LV3. Chapter 43 Change. This strengthening consumes 1 soul power, whether to strengthen it. Strengthen. Spirit LV3. 3 consecutive spiritual attribute enhancements. Let Morgan's body be injected with extremely comfortable and warm heat flow 3 times in a row. Coupled with the unprecedented clarity brought to his mind by strengthening the spirit, Morgan immediately felt ecstatic. Perhaps it is because of the special spiritual attributes. It may also be because of the huge improvement that has been strengthened 3 times in a row. At this moment, Morgan could clearly feel the changes in his 5 senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, perception. Originally, he thought that the spirit mainly determines the attribute ability of will and temptation. Now after the strengthening, it is found that it is far more than simply improving the ability of the will. Almost all the ability attributes related to the brain, but not dominant, have all been improved to varying degrees. And it needs simple training to adapt to the difference from the other 3 attributes after strengthening. Mental attributes adapt faster after being promoted. It is almost impossible to feel the dizziness, head pain, and other discomforts caused by the sudden and huge increase in spirit. Apart from feeling clearer and clearer in his mind, Morgan didn't feel any discomfort. Is this the remarkable effect of strengthening the spirit? Feeling the clearness in his mind, Morgan looked at the data panel in front of him. The spirit attribute of LV3 was still a little ready to move. But this kind of impulse is only the impulse that comes out naturally in physiology. In terms of consciousness, Morgan, who has just raised his spirit to LV3 level, is obviously calmer and more rational than before the strengthening. The spiritual attribute has been strengthened to LV3, such a huge improvement. Morgan believes that even if he cannot completely resist the temptation of the Supreme Lord of the Rings, he must have the power to resist. If even the spirit LV3 level is not enough to watch, Morgan doesn't believe that it's just ordinary Bilbo who can resist the ring's allure. A total of 7 points of soul power, 3 points were used up at once. Morgan's heart was bleeding, he had worked so hard to get these things. The improvement of spiritual attributes is enough for the time being. The remaining 4 attributes will naturally be used on the other 3 attributes. His eyes began to wander around the 3 attributes of strength, constitution, and agility. This time, again, without thinking too much, Morgan's mind moved slightly, and he clicked on the plus sign after the attributes of strength and physique respectively. This strengthening consumes 1 soul power, whether to strengthen it. Strengthen. Power LV2. This strengthening consumes one soul power, whether to strengthen it. Strengthen. Physique LV2. After 2 enhancements, Morgan's 4 attributes became Strength LV2, Constitution LV2, Agility LV2, Spirit LV3. Look at the remaining 2 points of soul power. After being silent for a while, Morgan clicked on the plus sign after the Agility attribute. This strengthening consumes one soul power, whether to strengthen it. Strengthen. Agile LV3. Morgan never forgot that he was an archer in the expedition team. Although the White Crow swordsmanship has been upgraded to LV2, his strength and physique have also improved a lot compared to the beginning, and his melee strength has greatly increased. But his strength in archery is still the strongest. Since it is the strongest, it must be maintained. What's more, there is no shortage of melee elites and meat shields in the expedition team. Morgan glanced at the column of soul power. There was still the last bit of soul power left. Strengthen what? Looking at the 4 attribute bars in front of him. After thinking about it, Morgan decided to focus the last bit of soul power on his physique. This strengthening consumes one soul power, whether to strengthen it. Strengthen. Physique LV3. Physique determines Morgan's blood volume, resistance, beating resistance, and resilience. No one would dislike their own blood. Archers belong to DPS, and they belong to the objects that are prioritized for killing in the game. It's similar in reality. In small-scale battles, the effect a good archer can have is terrifying. It is no surprise that it is prioritized. Other attributes are enough for the time being, and when you don't know what to strengthen, it is definitely right to add Constitution. As the last bit of soul power is consumed. Watching the column of soul power become empty again. Morgan felt lost like a miser. But feel the power that fills the whole body. I feel that I am getting stronger little by little at a speed visible to the naked eye. Morgan felt that everything was worth it. As all 7 points of soul power were consumed, Morgan's panel attributes also took on a new look. Transmigrator, Morgan. Race, Human. Biology level, Tier Dash. Soul power, 0. Attributes, Strength LV2, Constitution LV3+, Agility LV3+, Spirit LV3. Ability, Common Language, Muay Thai LV2, White Crow Sword LV2, Bow and Archery LV3. Talent, Intimacy, Special Skill. Current World Exploration Progress, 0.46%. Watch the brand new virtual data panel. Only then did Morgan realize that it was in the column of World Exploration Progress. The progress of world exploration in the morning was only 0.35%, but unexpectedly it skyrocketed to 0.46% in the evening. However, the progress of world exploration cannot be seen for the time being. Morgan didn't pay much attention either. When the virtual data in front of me began to dissipate. Only then did Morgan feel a chill all over his body. It turned out that the hot water in the bathtub had turned cold. He didn't care either. With his LV3 physique right now, he wouldn't feel cold even if he swam in the glacier in winter. Let alone now. Morgan didn't ask the elves to change the water, but started scrubbing with cold water. Wash off the blood and fatigue. When Morgan stood up and got out of the tub, he suddenly found out. The physical discomfort caused by the strengthening of the 4 attributes just now is far less intense than that after strengthening this morning. Morgan stood in the room and simply moved his hands and feet. I feel like my body is recovering quickly. What is the reason? Although the recovery is also very fast in the morning. But the speed is not as fast as it is now. Is it because the morning is the first time to strengthen the attribute? Morgan didn't know exactly why. But that's a good thing. To avoid the embarrassment of walking and falling next time. With just a few simple activities, Morgan felt his body return to normal. Putting on the exquisite clothes prepared for him by the elves, he opened the door and went out. Just as I went out, I saw a small garden not far away. A pile of strong bonfires has been burned, and there are grills on the bonfires, and the dwarves are sitting around the bonfires, talking and laughing. Seeing Morgan going out at this time, the dwarves immediately greeted them loudly. Watching this scene, Morgan smiled. He didn't need to ask to know that these dwarves must have not eaten enough at the previous banquet. But it's understandable if you think about it, the delicacies of the elves are full of grass, vegetables, fruits, and the like. No wonder the dwarves can eat enough. Morgan sat in front of the bonfire for a while, rejected the barbecue of the dwarves, and was about to get up and visit Rivendell. I saw Gandalf and King Elon walking together from a distance. Looking at this scene, Morgan's mind immediately remembered the relevant pictures in the memory plot. Next, it should be the scene where King Elon unlocked the secret of the Lonely Mountain map for the expedition team. Chapter 44. The Words of the Moon. Gandalf and King Elon came talking and laughing together. Morgan got up and greeted the two of them. He didn't want to visit Rivendell anymore, but sat back by the campfire again. Participating in the main storyline interaction is the best way to improve the world exploration progress of the transmigrator system on him. This has been proven by him several times, and Morgan will not be absent on such occasions. What's more, he has never seen the dispute between Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield. Although the two had only quarreled once in the temporary camp in the wild this morning, it was a pity that Morgan didn't see it when he was training. Keely, give me a bunch. Morgan sat back by the fire and reached out to Keely for a bunch of grilled sausages. Morgan, aren't you going to enjoy the night view of Rivendell? I'll go with you. The young dwarf filly yelled. Morgan shook his head, picked up the sausage and said, I think this one is more delicious. Haha, Morgan, you are right. The dwarf groin laughed loudly, reached out and took the few strings of sausages that Boffer had just skewered beside him, handed them to Morgan, and said loudly, where is a string of grilled sausages enough, take it. Take my sausage again, can't you do it yourself? Haha, Boffer, don't be so fussy, there's still a lot here, you just have to do it. Here, I invite you to bake potatoes. Damn, that's what I just made too. Haha. The dwarves in front of the campfire were giggling. Beside the campfire, Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield were discussing something. Morgan was grilling sausages, coping with the words of the dwarves around him, and looked up from time to time to the two expedition leaders who were talking. The white-bearded Balin next to him seemed to realize that Gandalf brought King Elon to find Thorin Oakenshield for a different purpose, and he was staring at the two of them intently. Noticing Bahrain's actions, Morgan took the fruit wine aside and gestured to Bahrain. Balin came back to his senses and realized that something was wrong with him. He smiled at Morgan, picked up the wine glass and touched Morgan, and drank it down. Are you worried about something, Balin? Looking at Bahrain who was hesitant to speak, Morgan also looked not far away, Gandalf and Thorin who were talking with serious faces behind the oak shield, and laughed. Morgan, what do you think the two of them are talking about? Balin didn't answer Morgan's words directly, picked up the wine bottle and poured himself another glass, and looked at Morgan and asked back. What are they talking about? You must know better than me, don't you? Morgan didn't answer either, but asked back with a smile. They had already argued once this morning. Balin shook his head, raised his glass to gesture to Morgan, and drank it down again. But there are always problems to be solved. Morgan spoke softly, drank the wine in the glass, wiped the wine stains around his mouth, and continued, I think Gandalf said something right today. Balin, what? Morgan, if we want to be successful, we need to use some strategy. Of course, you have your own ideas. No matter what the final decision is, I will support you. Morgan laughed, pouring himself another full glass. Rivendell's cider is far more sweet than wine. With his current constitution, Morgan felt that he could drink like this forever and never get drunk. Perhaps both you and Gandalf are right, but... Balin smiled and shook his head. Don't pay attention to my words, Balin, I know too little. Like I just said, no matter what you decide, I will support you. Come on, cheers. Morgan interrupted Balin, filled another glass of wine for Balin, and raised the glass with a smile. Anyway, thank you, Morgan, you are a very good fighter. It's a bounty hunter. Haha, it's all the same, come on, cheers. Cheers. Morgan and the dwarf Balin were chatting happily by the fire. Not far away, Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield also had a real chat. Gandalf, please, Thorin, get me the map. Thorin Oakenshield, we don't need elves to manage our affairs. Gandalf was helpless. God, Thorin, show the map to King Elon. Thorin Oakenshield remained unmoved, that is the legacy of me and my people, and my responsibility is to protect it, including our secrets. Gandalf took a deep breath, suppressed his anger, and his beard was trembling. Don't let me worry about your stubbornness anymore. Your arrogance will definitely kill you sooner or later. Do you know that you are standing in front of one of the few people in Middle-earth who can understand that map? Put down your pride and show it to King Elrond. Gandalf's chest rose and fell, suppressing his anger, looking at Thorin Oakenshield and said in a deep voice. As the dispute between Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield intensified, the dwarves around the campfire quickly quieted down. Everyone present looked at the two people in the dispute, and no one dared to say anything. King Elon stood quietly aside. Listening to the old friend arguing with that Thorin Oakenshield, his patience was constantly worn down. Although he was interested in the map, Gandalf said, the help was more because of Gandalf's request. Otherwise, no matter how open-minded and magnanimous he is, he will have a grudge against Thorin Oakenshield. Following Gandalf's voice fell. The two of them didn't speak again for a while, and the scene was silent at this moment. After a while, Thorin Oakenshield finally moved. He reached out and took out the light yellow parchment scroll from his pocket. Sorin, don't give it. Seeing that Thorin Oakenshield was persuaded by Gandalf, Whitebeard Balin immediately stepped forward, trying to stop Thorin Oakenshield. There are too many grievances between the Turin dwarves and the elves, and the entire dwarf team has no favor with the elves, and Bahrain is no exception. He even experienced the betrayal of the elves' allies, when the evil dragon invaded the Lonely Mountain 60 years ago. Thorin Oakenshield pushed aside Bahrain's obstruction, and walked straight to King Elon beside him with the map. As the king of the Turin dwarves, he is proud, stubborn, and his hatred for half-orcs and the elves who betrayed their allies is much deeper than any dwarf. However, as the king of the dwarves in Turin, he always kept in mind the mission of reviving the kingdom of Erebor under the mountain and the dwarves of Turin. For the sake of the group, any dwarf can pray to the elves for help without bowing their heads to the elves who are traitors. Only he can't. Because of the ethnic group, because he is the king of the Turin dwarves. The responsibility on him is as heavy as 1,000 weights. He took the light yellow parchment roll from Thorin Oakenshield. King Elon opened the scroll, looked at the map on it, and easily recognized it, Erebor. Are you interested in this map? Thorin Oakenshield looked at King Elon and asked back, his face was not very good looking. It's mainly academic research, you know, these kinds of antiquities usually contain secret words. Seeing what Thorin Oakenshield wanted to say, Gandalf hurriedly explained, and gave Thorin Oakenshield a reassuring look. I remember you could read old dwarves, right? Gandalf looked at King Elon who was holding a map and began to observe. King Elon didn't speak, just looking at the ancient map in his hand repeatedly. He had heard from Gandalf that the map contained secrets. So he raised the map in his hand, looked at the full moon in the sky, and observed it carefully. Soon, King Elon saw the clue, and slowly spit out a few words. Gandalf looked happy, and immediately said, the words of the moon. Right. If you want to understand the words of the moon, you must rely on the moonlight under the moon of the same season and shape as when they were written. King Elrond raised his head, looked at the crowd and said. Can you read them? Thorin Oakenshield suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked. Certainly. King Elrond raised his mouth, turned and walked towards the open-air viewing platform in the distance. Chapter 45. Guardian. King Elon is gone. Gandalf immediately followed. Thorin Oakenshield and Whitebeard Balin quickly followed. Morgan, who was almost watching the reenactment of the scene in the memory plot, naturally followed without hesitation. This kind of plot can definitely increase the progress of exploring the system world, and Morgan doesn't want to miss any of them. Seeing Morgan get up and leave, the dwarf groin beside him quickly shouted, Morgan, your grilled sausage is done. You eat it for me. Morgan waved without looking back. Hearing this, Gloyin laughed immediately, then I won't be polite. The dwarf Kili looked at the back of the teacher Morgan, looked at the surrounding dwarves, and said, aren't you going to go and have a look? What's so interesting about that? I don't understand anything. No, maybe Gandalf and Thorin will quarrel again later. Gandalf is here, and Sorin and Balin are also here. It doesn't matter whether we go or not. We might as well eat more sausages. The elves' sausages taste really good. Well, Boffer, give me 5 more sausage skewers. No, I want to eat it myself. Haha, Boffer is getting smarter. As soon as the group left, the dwarves soon started laughing and joking again. Bilbo looked at Morgan's figure, hesitated for a moment, but decided to go and see, so he got up and trotted after Morgan. King Elon knew all too well through a garden, 2 gazebos. Soon came to an open-air viewing platform. The entire viewing platform is located halfway up a tall mountain in Rivendell. It's like a mountain has been dug out by the middle. On the viewing platform, there is nothing but a table-like platform made of transparent crystal. The front is empty, the surroundings are empty, and there is no shelter. On both sides of the viewing platform, two majestic waterfalls descend from the sky, rushing day and night, splashing mist and rising. In the night sky, the bright and gentle moonlight poured down, covering everything. Morgan followed to the viewing platform. King Elon just stood in front of the crystal platform, spreading out the ancient map on the light yellow parchment in his hand. The text of these moons was written under the light of a new moon on a certain midsummer's eve 200 years ago. It seems that you are destined to come to Rivendell. Fate be with you, Thorin Oakenshield. The same moonlight shines on you and me tonight. King Elon looked at Thorin's oak shield and opened his mouth slowly. Not long after King Elon's voice fell. On the clean horizon in the distance, a dark cloud suddenly floated over, swallowing most of the originally bright full moon and turning it into a sharp crescent moon. Immediately afterwards, when the moonlight of the crescent moon shone down, strange things happened. On the ancient map spread out on the crystal platform, obscure characters with faint white light suddenly appeared. King Elon looked at the changes on the map, and began to speak in a slow and deep voice. When the thrush, standing by the grey rock, began to beat, the setting sun will fall on the keyhole with the last rays of Turin's day. King Elon uttered the information recorded in the text of the moon hidden on the map, but Thorin Oakenshield, Gandalf Balin and others were very disappointed. What is Turin Day? King Elon asked suddenly. Gandalf explained, that is the new year of the dwarves, the day when the last moon of autumn and the first sun of winter will meet in the sky at the same time. This is bad news. Summer is over, it's autumn now, and the day of Turin is coming soon. Thorin Oakenshield spoke in a deep voice. We still have time. The white-bearded Bahrain, who was standing aside and understood everything, suddenly said, but we must be in the right place at the right time. Then, and only then, can we open the door. Hearing these words and combining the information obtained from the map, King Elon finally understood what these dwarves wanted to do. King Elon handed the map back to Thorin Oakenshield, and said, so, this is your purpose, are you going to enter that mountain? Thorin Oakenshield took the map and said calmly, so what? King Elon said in a deep voice, some people will think that this move is unwise. Gandalf frowned, and immediately asked, who are you referring to? King Elrond turned his head to look at Gandalf and said seriously, you are not the only guardian of Middle-earth. King Elon left. On the viewing platform, Thorin Oakenshield, who finally got the information hidden on the map, was both happy and worried. Happiness is naturally the biggest problem for the expedition team, he knows the hidden entrance of Lonely Mountain. The worry is that it is already early autumn, and it will not be long before the day of Turin arrives. And they still have a long way to go before their journey to the Lonely Mountain. Thorin Oakenshield and Whitebeard Balin kept talking. Bilbo half understood, making soy sauce on the sidelines. Morgan looked at the dreamy night scene outside the observation deck, without saying a word. Gandalf was frowning, thinking about King Elon's last words. Soon, Gandalf was the first to leave the viewing platform. Thorin Oakenshield and Balin Bilbo left immediately afterward. Only Morgan left after admiring the night view of Rivendell on the viewing platform for a while. After leaving the observation deck, Morgan no longer wanted to meet the beautiful elf girl at first. He went straight to the dwelling that the elf had arranged for him. When we returned to the small garden, the little barbecue party with the dwarves around the bonfire was still going on. Morgan glanced at everyone and saw that everyone was there except Bilbo and Thorin Oakenshield. He tried his best to recall the scene in his memory. Only then did I discover that in the plot, the two went to Rivendell at night, and happened to hear the conversation between Gandalf and Lord Elon about this expedition. This is also the reason why Thorin Oakenshield led the team to leave Rivendell overnight in the memory plot. Although the plot has changed to a certain extent. Morgan doesn't fully believe in the plot now, but it's okay to make a rough reference for comparison. Thinking of this, Morgan was a little restless, because he had world exploration speed to spare. I have something to ask Soren, do you know where he went? Morgan looked at a group of dwarves and asked. Over there, let's go for a walk. Bahrain pointed in one direction and said. Morgan nodded and strode towards the direction Balin pointed. Just as he took a step, he suddenly stopped. And many more. The plot doesn't seem to be like this. Morgan tapped his head trying to recall the plot of the movie. Then he remembered that there seemed to be two versions of the Hobbit movie. One normal version and one extended version. In the normal version, the plot is exactly what he just thought of. But in the extended version, the expedition team stayed in Rivendell for a long time. He has seen both the extended version and the full version of the plot. It's just that he watched the normal version more times, so he didn't remember it for a while. Thinking of this, Morgan immediately turned around and walked back. Haven't really had a good night's sleep in over a month. Definitely get enough sleep this time. Chapter 46. Leisure time. Early the next morning. It was broad daylight when Morgan awoke. The warm sunshine of autumn shines into the delicate window through the big tree outside the window, and sprinkles spots on the clean floor. From time to time, there were one or two crisp and sweet birdsong outside the window. Exquisite room with fantastic decoration. Soft big bed, white quilt sheets. Looking at the strange and quiet things around, Morgan, who had just woken up from a deep sleep, sat on the bed in a daze, and was a little unresponsive for a moment. Where am I? It seems to be a very long dream. Soon, when the downtime brain quickly returned to normal, memories flooded in like a flood. Only then did Morgan remember that he was in the legendary capital of elves, Rivendell. And the system that appeared in the dream, the wizard Gandalf, the dwarves and the orcs were not Nanki-iming. It's about everything I've experienced in the past 2 months. It's just that he fell into such a deep sleep that he couldn't react for a while when he woke up. Call. After taking a long breath, Morgan fell back on the big soft bed. This sleep was finally solid, and he felt an unprecedented sense of relaxation all over his body. Although before encountering the orc night attack, the expedition team went smoothly all the way, but it was in the wild after all. Morgan has always been cautious and suspicious. Even if someone kept vigil at night, Morgan's sleep level was only maintained at the shallowest layer on the sleep surface. What's more, in the expedition team, everyone can sleep on the spot wrapped in a thin blanket or cushion at most. How can they sleep well? It's different now in Rivendell. This is one of the most powerful and safest places in all of Middle-earth. Naturally, Morgan didn't have to worry about anything when he slept here. Let go of your defenses in your heart, and you can get the deepest and best sleep physically. Morgan only lay on the bed for a while, and then got up quickly. He still hadn't forgotten that he hadn't mastered the White Crow swordsmanship and bow and archery skills that had just been strengthened by the system. Now that I have rare free time, it is natural to hurry up and train. He can sleep until dawn, instead of being woken up by dwarves in the middle of the night, which shows that the extended version of the memory plot is normal. Morgan knew that. Although I don't know how long the expedition team stayed in Rivendell. However, it can be seen from some pictures in the memory plot that the time spent by the expedition team in Rivendell should not be too short. But no matter how long it takes, Morgan will not forget the habit of insisting on training every day. The toiletry elves were ready yesterday. Morgan finished washing, dressed briefly, opened the door and walked to the room where the dwarves lived. The elves gave the breakfast food to the dwarves yesterday. This was also requested by the dwarves. They really couldn't eat the common food of the elves. It was only proposed to Lord Elon after the dinner. Lord Elon knew the habits of the dwarves and was considerate of the dwarves, so he naturally agreed to the dwarves' request. Although Morgan can also eat vegetarian food from the elves, but that can only be eaten occasionally. With his current food intake and the energy needed for a lot of exercise every day, it is too easy to get hungry if he eats vegetarian food. In comparison, the recipes of the purely carnivorous dwarves are obviously more to Morgan's liking. The room where Morgan lives is not far from the dwarves. Just after going out, Morgan saw 2 bonfires lit in a small garden not far away. A cooking pot was hanging over a fire, and a grill was being set up over a fire. The cook Pang Bo and the help cook Oli in the expedition team are busy. Some of the other dwarves were basking in the sun, some were chatting, and some were playing cards together. Morgan clearly knew that there were no cards in the expedition team. The only explanation is the cards these dwarves got from the elves. Morgan, good morning. Good morning. How did you sleep last night, Morgan? Good, how about you? Not good, the elf's bed is too soft. Good morning, Morgan. Morning, Dolly, you don't look very energetic. Hey, I couldn't sleep last night. Why? The elves' beds are so soft, I can't sleep. Morgan came over, and the dwarves said hello all the way. The weather is fine today, and everyone in the expedition team seems to be in a good mood. No, it's not just looking good, it's really all good. Rivendell has a good environment and beautiful scenery. Even the elves I met on the road are all handsome and beautiful, plus such a good weather. It is a person who can feel better in such an environment. Good morning, Morgan. At this time, a voice came from behind. Morgan turned his head and saw the energetic Bilbo standing behind him. Morning, Bilbo, how did you sleep last night? Morgan sat on the bench moved out by the dwarves and laughed. Very good, I haven't slept on such a soft and comfortable bed for a long time. Bilbo laughed. I see. Why didn't you see Gandalf? Morgan looked around and asked. I don't know, I haven't seen Gandalf since last night. But he seems to be very familiar here, and he may be accompanying Lord Elon now. Bilbo fell silent. Suddenly, a familiar voice came. I'm not with Lord Elon, but I'm here to accompany you. Hearing this voice, Morgan and Bilbo turned their heads, and saw Gandalf in a large grey robe approaching with a staff in his hand, smiling. Good morning, Gandalf. Good morning, Dolly, you don't look very energetic. Morgan said the same thing just now, I have insomnia. Oh, that's unfortunate. Morning, Gandalf. Good morning, Philosophy. Gandalf greeted the dwarves all the way, looked at the two sitting on the bench and said with a smile, how about it, you two should not suffer from insomnia like Dory. Of course not, the elves' beds are soft, and last night was the best sleep I've ever had since leaving Hobbiton. Bilbo laughed quickly. What about you, Morgan? Gandalf sat down on the bench and immediately took out the cigarette rod hanging from his waist. Of course, like Bilbo, he hasn't been so relaxed in a long time. By Gandalf, how long shall we stay here? Morgan smiled and asked softly. Hearing Morgan's words, Gandalf was silent for a while, then smiled and said, well, let's stay here first, anyway, it's been a long time. His old friend Lord Elon told him last night to ask him to wait for someone in Rivendell, but he didn't say who the other party was. Naturally, it was difficult to tell Morgan about such things that even he didn't know. That's just right, it's rare to come to Rivendell once, and this time I have to have a good time. Realizing that Gandalf might have something to do, Morgan consciously didn't ask too much, nodded and smiled. This is truly a rare opportunity. Gandalf laughed as he knocked on the pipe. At this time, a strong fragrance came from the fire next to it. The first breakfast in Rivendell was cooked. Chapter 47. Deadline. Aromas come from the skillet and grill. No need to shout at all the dwarves can tell whether the food is cooked or half-cooked just by sniffing. Morgan and Bilbo had now learned this ability of the dwarves too. On the journey of more than a month before. Because the food is compact, if the meal time is a little slower, although it is not impossible to eat. But there must be a lot of things like jerky and meat left. In order to compete with the dwarves and not fall behind, Morgan and Bilbo also learned the ability of the dwarves to use their noses to identify when food is cooked. Around the game on the side, there was a circle of dwarves. The main players in the card game were the three dwarves Philly, Boffer, and Groin. Originally holding a handful of bad cards, Boffer was having a headache about how much he would lose in this round. However, when the smell of meat wafted from the side, Boffer's eyes lit up immediately, he threw down the cards in his hand almost without hesitation, and shouted, breakfast is ready, it's time to eat, let's stop playing. Boffer threw down the card and ran away, but was grabbed by Groin who was faster. Groin handed the card in front of Boffer's face and said viciously, I still want to run, look what card I have. Another poker player, Philly, also handed over the cards in his hand at the right time, and said with a smile, Boffer, take a look at my cards again. Haha, this boy Boffer wants to do this again. Groin won't be fooled a third time. Nice job. Haha, let's do the same next time. It's time to eat. Wow, today's breakfast is really delicious. Palmer cooks better than ever. It's just that the elves give enough spices, I can do it too. My god, Dolly, can you not mention your cooking skills? Philly was right, Dolly's cooking was a nightmare, I still remember. Hey, don't be like this, I don't want to. Haha, you see, Dolly finally knows how to be shy. Hate. Ha 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 ha. In the picturesque scenery of Rivendell, under the warm sunshine of early autumn, in the sunny days, Morgan and a group of dwarves enjoyed this very hearty breakfast. After a pleasant breakfast, Morgan went to a quiet corner of the garden alone to practice white duck swordsmanship. Concentrate on practicing white duck swordsmanship in the morning. Practice archery in the afternoon. This is Morgan's training plan during his stay at Rivendell. Try to master LV2 White Duck swordsmanship and LV3 archery as quickly as possible. Morgan's Rivendell vacation was dull. Compared with Morgan, the dwarves have a much more comfortable holiday. Rivendell has endless meat, all kinds of meat. There is also endless wine, all kinds of wine. Speaking of which, Lord Elon is very good to the expedition team. As long as it is a normal demand, he will almost respond to every request. Of course, the needs of the dwarves are basically food and drink. Dwarves are not polite to elves who respond to requests. A few small barbecues a day, plus a barbecue party in the evening. Eating and drinking without restraint every day, plus too little exercise. The sports of the dwarves include sitting around telling jokes and playing cards. It's like going to the largest square fountain in Rivendell to take a bath together, and take off your whole body. It can be imagined that the whole body has dark body hair, and the figure is like a picture of a superhuman-shaped black mouse taking a bath. This made all the elves who saw it feel unbearable to look directly at it, and felt hot eyes. The elves reacted to Lord Elon. Lord Elon told his old friend Gandalf. After being persuaded by Gandalf, the dwarves restrained themselves. Eating and drinking intemperance, too little exercise. This caused the dwarves to gain weight almost as quickly as they could see. It was Thorin Oakenshield who finally discovered this terrifying situation, and the eating and drinking of the dwarves was controlled. Bilbo's Rivendell vacation is also very comfortable. It is not used for the hard training like Morgan, and it is not the same as the dwarves' indulgence. Bilbo liked to be in the library in Rivendell. The elves of Rivendell are very rich, plus they have a long lifespan, plus there has never been a war since it was built. The books accumulated in Rivendell's library over the countless years are astonishing. Bilbo spent most of the day in the library for this reason. As for Gandalf, he was freer and more at ease. Because of his relationship with Lord Elon, Gandalf is more familiar with Rivendell than anyone in the expedition. Gandalf would often dine, smoke, and chat with the expedition members. But sometimes I get tired of eating the barbecue of the dwarves, and I will go to have a meal with Lord Elon for a change. The rest of the time, he either wandered around, chatted and drank tea with Lord Elon, and then went fishing in the big river in front of Rivendell. Fishing is an extremely patient sport. First of all, it must have nothing to do with the dwarves. No matter how much time the dwarves have, they are not willing to waste a minute and a second on such boring things as fishing. In the eyes of the dwarves, fishing was more boring than Morgan's training in all weathers. Bilbo was not interested in fishing either. Only Morgan was somewhat interested in fishing. However, because of his training, he didn't spend much time fishing with Gandalf. Gandalf didn't care, it was just killing time. Just like that, 6 days passed by. Evening of the 7th day. In the small garden in front of the Rivendell expedition rest room, a great bonfire was burning. Meat sprinkled with spices on the grill exudes a rich aroma. Members of the expedition team are sitting around the bonfire and eating. This is a normal dinner barbecue party for the expedition team in Rivendell. Balin, the white-bearded dwarf, drank the fruit wine in his glass, wiped the wine stains on his beard, looked at Soren Oakenshield beside him and said, "Soren, we have been repairing in Rivendell for a while, it's time to continue our journey, we don't have that much time." "I know, I'm about to mention it to Gandalf, and I'll leave in 2 days." Thorin Oakenshield nodded and finished speaking in a deep voice, and continued to deal with the piece of meat in his hand. At the same time, in the depths of Rivendell, in an exquisite and luxurious attic, Gandalf was dining with Lord Elon. "Master Elon, today is the 7th day. I don't know when the person you mentioned will arrive." Gandalf chewed the last sweet fruit on the plate and swallowed it. Then he put down the tableware, picked up a white napkin and wiped the stains on his mouth, and asked, "Why, are you tired of staying here?" Lord Elon said with a smile. "Of course not. Just keep going, Thorin, and the others will not be able to stay any longer." Gandalf shook his head and spoke. He obviously knew enough about Thorin Oakenshield. "I don't know the exact time, but calculating the time, it should be in these 2 days." Lord Elon smiled and comforted. At this moment, a small, beautiful bird with white feathers suddenly stopped by the window. Chapter 48. The Elf Queen. Choo choo. The bird with snow-white wings looked at Lord Elon in the window and called softly, the sound was sweet and clear. Lord Elon turned his head and saw the bird, with a smile on his face immediately. "Gandalf, come with me for a walk." Lord Elon took a sip of the amber-colored fruit wine in the exquisite wine glass in his hand, slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said, "Of course, it's my pleasure." Gandalf put a delicate and small post-dinner pastry into his mouth, chewed and swallowed, nodded and smiled. In the small garden, the sumptuous barbecue dinner of the expedition team is still going on. Dinner was in full swing. The dwarves drank wine, ate meat, and told bad jokes loudly, feeling very comfortable. Morgan was sitting by the fire smoking a handsome oak pipe. The oak pipes are of course from Rivendell. It was the afternoon of 2 days ago, and Morgan was practicing archery tirelessly in a quiet corner of the small garden. But Lord Elon, who was wandering around, happened to meet him. Of course, Morgan didn't believe Lord Elon's claim that he was just wandering around. In short, the powerful Lord Elon met Morgan, who was contacting archery, and was very surprised by Morgan's archery. Morgan was able to succeed in his previous life not only because of his own strength, but also because of his experience in dealing with people and things. He had a fairly good impression when he came into contact with Lord Elon before. In addition, the bow and arrow skills that are now so superb that they can almost be called a sharpshooter. The conversation between Morgan and Lord Elon was very pleasant. This time, Lord Elon also clearly expressed kindness to Morgan, instead of just being polite to Morgan as a friend of Gandalf before. After some conversation, the relationship between the two was brought closer. Before Lord Elon left, he asked Morgan if he needed anything. Morgan insisted that he wanted a pipe. Lord Elon nodded and left with a smile. So at supper time that day, the elves sent a fine oak pipe. Due to his professional relationship in his previous life, Morgan had never touched cigarettes and drank alcohol very restrainedly. Now in this world, with the golden thigh system, naturally there is no need to be so restrained. As for the shredded tobacco he smoked, it was stolen from Gandalf from time to time. Because of his relationship with Lord Elon, Gandalf supplemented a large amount of high-quality tobacco from the other party. It was because of greed that Morgan boldly asked Elon for a pipe. Back to the topic. The dwarves drank wine, ate meat, and were still chattering and telling bad jokes. Morgan, who had already eaten and drank enough, was puffing away at the side. On the other side, the white-bearded dwarf Balin was still chatting with Thorin Oakenshield. "Has the elf agreed to help?" Balin asked. "Gandalf hasn't mentioned it to me yet." Thorin Oakenshield shook his head. "Today is already the 7th day. If the elves want to help, they should say so." Bahrain was silent for a while, and Shen Sheng continued to speak. "I know." Thorin Oakenshield nodded and remained silent for a while, then drank the wine in the bottle, got up and walked to the side. Morgan, whose spirit has been strengthened to LV3, now has much better 5 senses than before the strengthening. Although the scene was very noisy, he still heard Balin and Thorin Oakenshield clearly. It has been a week since the expedition came to Rivendell. Although Morgan knew that the expedition team would definitely leave, he didn't know the exact time. Now listen to the conversation between Balin and Thorin Oakenshield. He knew that it would not be too long before he left Rivendell. Ha 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 ha. Morgan was smoking a cigarette, looking at the bright yellow flames jumping and flickering in front of him, a little lost in thought. At this moment, Morgan suddenly turned his head, watching the back of Thorin Oakenshield disappear from sight, and immediately thought of one thing. With Thorin Oakenshield's stubbornness, he decided to leave, and the expedition team must not stay for long. What caused him to leave without saying goodbye in the memory plot was that he heard the conversation between Gandalf and Lord Elon. In the conversation, it was Lord Elon's dissatisfaction with this expedition, and his dissatisfaction with Thorin Oakenshield. This led to Thorin Oakenshield, who was extremely proud of himself, not saying goodbye to Gandalf, let alone the elves. Instead, he chose to leave directly. Could it be tonight? The night Thorin Oakenshield heard the conversation between Gandalf and Lord Elon. Thinking of this, Morgan immediately couldn't sit still. The world exploration progress of the system in the body is extremely slow. Morgan is unwilling to give up any plot that increases the progress of exploration. What's more, even if you guess wrong, you have nothing to lose. Thinking of this, Morgan didn't hesitate, got up immediately, and strode towards Thorin Oakenshield's direction. Deep in Rivendell, Gandalf in a grey robe was walking with Lord Elon on an exquisite winding path, chatting while walking. Lord Elon said with some dissatisfaction, "Gandalf, you and Thorin Oakenshield should have told me earlier about the purpose of this time." Gandalf said quickly, "Of course I intend to tell you, I have been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. And I think you should believe that I know what I'm doing." Lord Elon said in a deep voice, "Do you really know? The dragon has been sleeping for 60 years. If your plan fails, what if the dragon wakes up?" Gandalf retorted, "What if we succeed? If the dwarves take back that mountain, our defences in the east will be strengthened." Lord Elon shook his head, "This step is too risky, Gandalf." Gandalf went on to retort, "It is dangerous for us to do nothing. Please, Thorin is the king of Erebor, what are you afraid of?" After the words fell, Lord Elon stopped immediately, then turned around, stood in front of Gandalf and said in a deep voice, "Did you forget? There's a history of madness in their family. His grandfather was insane and his father was stricken with the same disease. Do you dare to say that Thorin Oakenshield will not be like this? Gandalf, these are not matters for us to decide. The pattern of Middle-earth is not something that you and I can change." Hearing his old friend's solemn words, Gandalf knew that he would not be able to convince the other party today. Only continue to speak out the attitude of the dwarves. With or without our help, those dwarves will march toward that mountain. They are determined to take back their homeland. I don't think Thorin felt he needed to ask anyone for instructions. Actually, I think so too. Gandalf strode behind Lord Elrond and shouted out the decision of the dwarves, hoping that something might be redeemed. The two walked to the door of the exquisite attic on the top of the mountain. Lord Elon suddenly turned around and looked at his old friend, "What you said makes sense, but it's not me you need to ask for instructions." After the words fell, Lord Elon stepped aside. Then, Gandalf saw an ethereal and beautiful figure shrouded in hazy moonlight with an otherworldly temperament. Chapter 49. Galadriel. Wearing a pure white long dress, long golden hair and a shawl, her face is majestic, delicate, noble, and glamorous. The figure bathed in the pale white hazy moonlight does not seem to belong to the world, but a spirit from the sky descending from the mortal world. It seems that all the beautiful words in the world to describe women can be added to the figure in front of me. Looking at the ethereal and beautiful figure with a faint light all over his body under the moonlight, Gandalf's expression was shocked, his pupils dilated sharply, and then he bowed and saluted, and sincerely uttered a voice deep in his heart, "Lady Galadriel." The figure known as Galadriel turned around, looked at Gandalf who was saluting, and smiled, "Mithrandil. Long time no see." Gandalf bowed his head again and praised sincerely, "Time may make me old, but it will never change you, Lady Galadriel. In the entire Middle-earth world, there is only one person in front of me who can make Gandalf, who is the real god of Mayas, salute so willingly and is sincerely happy from the bottom of his heart. If Morgan is here, he can clearly recognize that this Lady Galadriel has a series of other titles, Lady Lorien, Princess Noldor, White Queen, Queen of Magic and so on. Of course, Morgan in his previous life and a large number of fans who like Middle-earth prefer to call this one, Elf Queen and the slightly interesting guy new. Lady Galadriel, Galadriel in Sindarin means girl with a crown on her head. Galadriel, the most noble of the elven women in the entire Middle-earth world, she is the ruler of the Golden Forest Rose Lorien and the most powerful elven queen in the Middle-earth world since the Third Era. She has a beauty beyond biological limits, the ability to see people's hearts, and boundless wisdom. She is very kind and understanding, but at the same time has the arrogance and self-willedness of a princess. She is Galadriel, the most alluring, most terrifying, most powerful, and most beautiful pearl in all Middle-earth. After saying hello, Gandalf had an unconcealable smile on his face. Looking at Galadriel not far away, Gandalf smiled and said, "I didn't know Lord Eldrin invited you here." Gandalf's voice fell, and another voice suddenly sounded, "It's not him. I asked for it." As soon as the voice fell, the happy smile on Gandalf's face that had just seen the Elf Queen disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Gandalf evidently recognized whose voice it belonged to, but he did not want very much, nor did he want to see the one who made it. Just tending to etiquette, Gandalf could only turn his head very reluctantly, looked at the wizard holding a staff, wearing a white robe, with a smooth white hair and white beard but a pair of black bushy eyebrows, and saluted. "Perfunctory, I see. Saruman, he is one of the most well-known Maya, who controls Isengard, discovered the crystal ball of true knowledge, and is the president of the Holy White Council. Saruman was the first mayor who came to Middle-earth. He was the white-robed wizard among the 5 wizards mentioned by Gandalf, and he was also the most powerful among the wizards." Just when Gandalf was in the attic on the top of the highest mountain in Rivendell, he saw Galadriel, the Queen of Elves, and Saruman, the wizard in white robes, and was experiencing the double world of ice and fire. in a gazebo diagonally across from the trail leading to the loft on the top of the mountain. Morgan found Thorin Oakenshield, who was distracted and watched and heard the conversation between Gandalf and Lord Elon not long ago. He also saw with his own eyes that Thorin Oakenshield's complexion gradually became heavy and ashen from a good mood at first. Especially when Lord Elon said that his family had a history of going crazy, Morgan could feel the extreme anger suppressed in Thorin Oakenshield's heart. Morgan could imagine how angry Thorin Oakenshield, who was so proud and stubborn, would feel when he heard the other say so about his family, the grandfather he adored, the father he adored, and himself. But Thorin Oakenshield didn't say a word. Perhaps it was because Morgan was at the side, Thorin Oakenshield was just silent. But Morgan saw with his own eyes that Thorin, who was leaning on the railing of the gazebo, made a crackling sound as the oak shield pinched the railing of the gazebo. Under such circumstances, Morgan would naturally not be so stupid as to persuade Thorin Oakenshield or something. Not to mention the stubborn nature of the dwarves, Thorin Oakenshield couldn't persuade him at all. Going to try to persuade Thorin Oakenshield at this time is to offend Thorin Oakenshield. Morgan would not do such a stupid thing. At this time, keeping silent is the best way. Morgan didn't have to wait long. After being silent for a while, Thorin Oakenshield greeted him aloud, and then strode away. Looking at the back of the other party going away, Morgan understood why Thorin Oakenshield left so suddenly, and didn't even say hello to his master. Morgan also knew when he would leave Rivendell, it must be tonight. Regarding Gandalf's good intentions tonight, Elrond Elf Lord's concern, Thorin Oakenshield's anger, Morgan naturally said that it had nothing to do with him. He was just a soy sauce party who signed a contract to make money to earn soul power, and by the way, to track the progress of world exploration, and worked hard as a worker. The major changes in the Middle-earth world have little to do with him. Sitting alone in the gazebo, even though the surrounding night scenery was excellent, Morgan still looked up at the path that Gandalf and Lord Elon walked by not long ago. He knows, if there are no other big changes, at the end of that path, there should be an attic or gazebo or something. And in that attic, Galadriel, Queen of the Elf, and Saruman, the white-robed wizard, should be inside. Although I really want to see the most beautiful and powerful elf queen in the entire Middle-earth world. And this time is also the most convenient and simplest time, that is, just rushing in rashly to achieve the idea. But Morgan hasn't lost his mind. Just when Morgan was thinking of waiting here by sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the few people up there to finish chatting, will they come down that trail so that he can see it with their own eyes? Just then, he heard footsteps coming from under the gazebo where he was. Morgan turned his head, and saw the fully equipped dwarf Keely figure appearing on the stone ladder. Morgan, it's time for us to go. This is Thorin's order. Keely gasped. Morgan was taken aback for a moment, but he wasn't surprised and didn't say anything. He just got up and left the gazebo with Keely. At the same time, in the attic on the top of the mountain, Gandalf, who was judged by the three parties, sat at the round table in the center of the attic. Carefully took out something wrapped in layers of white cloth from his body, and put it on the table. In this scene, if Morgan was present, he would know that the prop on the table, which originally belonged to the memory plot and had never been encountered in reality, still appeared. He didn't know anything. The plot changed again. Chapter 50. Leaving without saying goodbye. The hazy moonlight shrouded Rivendell. In the attic on the top of the mountain, Gandalf sat on the round table in the center, facing the interrogation of Galadriel, the Queen of Elves, Saruman, the wizard in white robes, and Eldrin, the Elf Lord of Rivendell. A fierce argument and rebuttal with a calm tone but no calmness between the words is going on. Tell me, Gandalf, do you think your plans and schemes will be unknown? Of course not, I'm just doing what I think is right. Gandalf, for 400 years we have lived in peace, and have carefully maintained this hard-won peace. When the dwarves go to the Lonely Mountain, they will definitely wake up the evil dragon. Always peaceful, is it really peaceful? Do you know that Green Forest is already called Mirkwood by the surrounding residents? Radagast says he's found sightings of the necromancer in Dol Guldur. Don't mention the brown-robed wizard Radagast, he's an idiot. He ate too many poisonous mushrooms, lost his mind, and stained his teeth yellow. I told him already. You haven't convinced me yet, Gandalf. I don't think I can stand this crusade of the dwarves. If the dwarves come to me, I will give them no hope. Among the three trials, the white-robed wizard Saruman was the most dissatisfied with the expedition team. seeing that he couldn't satisfy all three in front of him in terms of words. Finally, Gandalf carefully took out something wrapped in layers of white cloth from his body and placed it on the round table in the center of the hall. This was a few days ago, early in the morning when the expedition team encountered the three giant rock trolls. Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield were on their way to relax after arguing, and met the brown-robed wizard Radagast, who gave it to him, and told him about the serious changes in the Great Green Forest. "What is that?" Seeing the things Gandalf took out carefully, Lord Elon asked immediately, wanting to reach out and touch them. Just when Lord Elon was about to meet, the voice of Elf Queen Galadriel suddenly sounded, "That's the remains of Mordo." After the words fell, Lord Elon's hand retracted immediately as if it had been stabbed suddenly. Following Galadriel's words, the atmosphere in the entire attic became quiet. Gandalf immediately stretched out his hand and uncovered the wrapped white cloth, revealing a short sword with a black hilt and a silver blade. This seemingly ordinary dagger, which clearly reveals traces of time and evil aura, is by no means ordinary. "This is the ancient sword of the Demon Cave," Lord Elon said in surprise. The other two are not ordinary people, and they both saw the abnormality of the dagger in front of them immediately. The atmosphere in the attic on the top of the mountain immediately became serious. At the same time, Morgan was getting up and walking quickly behind Keely the dwarf to the small garden where the expedition team was temporarily staying. "Did Thorin say anything else?" Morgan looked at the student on the side and asked casually. "No, he didn't say anything other than ordering us to go now. Though we all want to know why." Hearing Morgan's words, Keely shook his head and spoke. Keely's expression was indifferent, and he really wanted to know. After all, the elves treated them very well these days. They just wanted to leave, so they had to say hello to Lord Elon no matter what. What's more, Keely would not lie to the human Morgan, who could be regarded as his teacher in essence. "I thought I might know something." Morgan spoke softly, but apart from this sentence, he didn't speak any more. Keely had the urge to say something but stopped, but teacher Morgan didn't want to say more, so he naturally didn't want to ask more. When the two returned to Xiaohuayuan's residence together, "The dwarves are almost ready to pack up." Morgan didn't hesitate, and went straight back to his residence to tidy up quickly. Morgan didn't have many things, so after tidying up, he had time to trim himself. The black hair that had grown to the shawl was cut to the length of the chin by him, so that it was loose and comfortable, and it was convenient and easy to tie it into a ponytail. Shave off the beard, and shave off the beard on the manly sides of the cheeks. After more than a month of long and dangerous journey, Morgan, who originally had a little boyish temperament, became more masculine after being honed. At this time, the trimmed Morgan looks very mature and sexy. "I didn't expect that I would become so handsome one day." Standing in front of the delicate glass mirror, Morgan muttered. Just then, there was a knock on the door of the room. Immediately afterwards, the voices of dwarves came from outside. Morgan picked up the package and strode out the door. "When I went out, I found that the dwarves were already with big bags on their backs. Because there was a reason for planning when to leave from the beginning. When the elves prepared the daily consumption for the expedition team, the dwarves deliberately ordered more dry food such as dried meat, noodles, wine, and so on. This time it finally came in handy. The large and small packages on the dwarves are almost all dry food." Morgan saw Bilbo in the crowd. For the sudden departure of the dwarves, and the absence of Gandalf, Bilbo's face was full of confusion. When he was visiting Rivendell before, he met Eldrin Elf Lord. Lord Elrond had told him frankly that Rivendell would welcome Bilbo to stay as long as he wanted. The sudden change at this time made the words of Lord Elon flash across Bilbo's confused mind. It's just that because he had promised Gandalf, signed an agreement with the dwarves, and the habit of taking risks together for more than a month, Bilbo couldn't bear to say that he would leave the team and stay in Rivendell. Just when Bilbo was urged away by the dwarves in a very confused state, he saw Morgan in full gear. In the expedition team, apart from the wizard Gandalf, Bilbo has the best relationship with the human Morgan. Seeing Morgan at this time, Bilbo, who was unable to leave firmly, seemed to see the savior and his only partner. Morgan is powerful, Morgan will not ridicule and look down on himself, Morgan has a good relationship with himself. All the previous adventures flashed through his mind, and Bilbo's originally unsteady mind seemed to have a backbone immediately, and quickly became firm. Looking at Bilbo, who was a little lost in his soul, Morgan naturally had some understanding of this in his heart. So he walked quickly to Bilbo's side, patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "It's all right, Bilbo, take it easy. After being slapped and said by Morgan, Bilbo's face was obviously calmed down a lot. Morgan, did we leave so suddenly? Also, what about Gandalf, won't Gandalf leave with us? Bilbo, who had collected himself, approached Morgan immediately and asked in a low voice. It's Thorin who is leaving. As for Gandalf, he will certainly return, he just needs to be away for a while. Take it easy, Bilbo. Morgan walked behind the line and explained quickly to Bilbo in a low voice. Follow up quickly. At this moment, Thorin Oakenshield's voice came from ahead. Morgan patted Bilbo, and strode forward in front of the line. Bilbo only thought for a while, and then quickly followed Morgan. The moonlight in the sky was hazy, and the expedition team quickly went to Rivendell in the night.